for those delinquents who don't come on live or who can't or think they can't. Okay. I think I will begin a little bit in the middle of things today. When I start these, there's always a whole bunch of stuff swimming around in my mind. A lot I want to tell you at once that I can't, of course, tell you all at once, although I'd like to. God, all kinds of stuff. Incredible clarity on the meta strategy as a whole. Really, it's all getting very unified. So I almost have a unified theory of how it all works, and which all has to do with, as I said before, there's basically one overall question, right? Which is some form of how do we make decisions, how do we succeed, how do we figure out what we want and then get it, and so forth, right? And I think I'm going to, over time, probably within the first couple of sessions, possibly today, one of the things I'm understanding particularly newly and differently, and it's not the kind of thing people immediately think about or immediately see the benefit of, perhaps, but it's going to open up all kinds of doors and be super helpful, is understanding that we see our mind actually create things out of different. And so in order to see something, you have to look at the difference between two things. And if you try to look directly, even just in terms of vision, it's a known thing that if you just look directly at something without your eyes moving, then the image will actually disappear. But I'm not just talking about visually, I'm talking about theoretically and conceptually and visually and everything. Objects don't exist in exactly the way that we think. And things, even things like love or whatever concepts, our mind makes things like couch or an object or something like love or whatever out of a difference between two situations or whatever. I can't even to explain what it's a difference of, take some background. But that being said, why did I bring that up? That's going to be ultimately extremely important. It's going to affect the question of perception is going to end up being relevant in terms of overall. I also realized how to explain further or better or additionally what it is that I'm addressing. The basic question, once again, has to do with not being stuck. But I think that it's not obvious if you just try not to be stuck, or if you just hear the advice. And Megan posted some great quotes. I appreciate that I've made. And recently today I posted one about not being stuck that I said. But there's a way that people get stuck that looks like they're not stuck, where they're basically running in circles or they're doing all kinds of stuff and look like they're making progress within a kind of an area or region, but they're ultimately imprisoned within a certain, ultimately there's no way for them to really break out like that. And so that people dumb down their standards and convince themselves that they're doing well and that they're succeeding and so forth. But again, it's a prison in terms of there's an assumption, right? Sometimes we call it a conceptual box, but this happens to everyone. And the proof that everyone is blind to it to a degree is that people are trapped when it comes to epistemology, when it comes to understanding what's true. People constantly make the assumption that when something seems clearly true, when they feel certain that it's correct. Yeah, that's another thing that I'll illustrate better over time. But everyone, if people were really getting out of running in circles, they would conclude on their own that they would need to understand the answer to how to differentiate between things that seem so true and that feel so right and certain, but they're still wrong, or figuring out the hidden assumptions. Remember, I said we see difference. What that means is that if there's something incorrect, but it's pervasive, it's all over the place, everyone assumes it, and we assume it, and it's just there all the time, then we actually don't see it. And there's incorrect assumptions like that, right? And there's so many examples of that. It's hard to know where to start. One of the things that I thought of different ways to organize today, but there's just also some kind of specific pieces of helpful advice or things I could point out to you to help you with succeeding with OMG and making income the way we're looking to do. But hey, everyone, that stuff behind a water buffalo again. That's funny. The local peak. It's a beautiful okay, so Julie captures it perfect, right? For those of us who've heard me talk about local peaks and really thought about it, taking it to heart, it's such a powerful concept. Oh, that brings to mind another example. The fact that so many people don't see the problem with evolutionary theory is another example of the idea of there's a certain way that things get stuck that people don't see it. And so the evolutionary algorithm that Darwin basically came up with, and then there might have been when I say there might have been, I'm aware of the various attempts, but however, depending on how your opinion is or how you want to characterize it, there's different tweaks or additions to the theory, but it's never really changed from the basic scheme of chance and necessity, or mutation and natural selection is another way to put it. That algorithm. That algorithm, the big, huge breakthrough that it was supposed to be was the idea behind grand evolutionary theory. And this is all relevant for making your money, and so forth. The idea was that it was an algorithm that could create progress and that could keep progressing, where life as a whole, or the diversity of life and so forth, they can keep progressing, even to the idea of that it could create organisms that then could become conscious, which is wrong for another reason. But the algorithm of, even if you start magically with organisms that can reproduce, you skip over how ridiculous it is to get that from like the basic nitrogen, carbon, oxygen, and so forth that you'd be supposedly starting with. But even if you skip way ahead over a bazillion impossible problems and you get to where you have reproducing organisms, then that algorithm, and it's the same algorithm that happens in your life when you get stuck with making money or trying to get clients, or in a relationship, or both, or whatever, a client relationship, or getting yourself motivated and all sorts of figuring out what to do in all kinds of cases. So it's all the same thing. It's all holographic in that way. If I ever use an example that seems off topic, it's just because it's just illustrating something that's relevant. So the evolutionary algorithm looks like it makes progress. You have this idea of the mutations throw up diversity, right? The offspring are different, and so they might have different. Sometimes those differences might be maladaptive, but sometimes they might be adaptive, as the theory goes, right? And that might be helpful. And then, because not all organisms survive or have equal number of grandkids, so to speak, then the ones that have the more helpful mutations would have more grandkids or more offspring, right? The other ones might die out. And so the theory goes. But that ignored the fact that what actually happens, both theoretically, if you do the theory right, and then this is illustrated literally constantly in nature all the time, everywhere, is revert to wild type, which is like the kind of archetype. If you have people breed dogs on purpose, then they get all these diversity when they select for certain purebreds. But if you release dogs into the wild, then what you get is they get stuck in a local peak. They just revert to a mutt, right? As we think of it, like dog. If you picture a kind of dog, then they look a lot like that. And this happens every time, essentially. And they don't have kids that are like cats, partway to a cat. Right? As a matter of fact, then what's the problem? Is between a dog and a cat, or a dog and a wolf, or whatever the heck, or at least between a dog and the next importantly different species that's really totally different in order to create diversity. Obviously, they can have kids that are different, and if you call them different species, that's fine. But to really hop into something different, they need to go, they would theoretically, this wouldn't happen in nature because of the problem, but you need to go through a local valley, right? You need to go through body types, changes that are maladaptive, that aren't helpful, right? In between a dog and whatever the heck it supposedly would evolve into. Then there's all sorts of problems in between. So people get stuck in local peaks. I give the example of government, where a more proper government would involve no taxation. But then between here and there is a local valley. And so we never get there. And seeing how people don't come to that conclusion very readily, that there should simply be none, period. And you start there. And even the idea that you don't need a solution, you don't need to figure out what it's supposed to look like after that. You just get rid of the problem, or one of the problems, and then the answer will reveal itself. In practice, that doesn't end up happening. And that's another proof that, see, it's holographic. When we're trying to succeed, we get stuck. Like there's a sense of, darn it, like I'm imprisoned in some way. Not exactly imprisoned, but it's like I'm on an island and the solution doesn't seem to be here to something. To some things it is, right? Some things we want, we can just reach out and get. And the good news is I really have this whole thing figured out tremendously. So I'm going to be able to, over time, explain this really well. But there's something we're missing often, right? Where it's like we're running. And the problem is when we don't even feel like we're missing something. The great news is that there's stuff you're missing that you don't even realize, but that as you realize it and realize how the algorithm you're running is going to be getting you stuck without you even knowing it. That's the real stuck that people get, is when they feel certain of one thing, when they don't see that they're stuck, right? And there's ways that we all don't see that we're stuck. And that's causing even more issues, or locking you out of more good stuff than even where you feel stuck. It's almost good news if you feel like you're stuck to a degree. The great news ultimately that I have for you is I'll probably show you ways that you're stuck, you don't even realize it, and out the other end of that, and hopefully give you the tools, either tell you the exact answer, the exact path, or give you tools depending on the thing to get out of it into a better region, so to speak. And you won't even realize, right? Some big difficulty has gone out of your life you didn't even see because it was always there, but you sure as heck see when it's gone, right? There's a pain that you have, you start to not even realize you have, but it ends up sure being nice to not have it, right? Or even just lacking money. There's all sorts of assumptions. You see it like with a car, right? You get a fancy car and overall people just love it. But there's also the general sentiment among some people where they say, even if I had that much money, I wouldn't get a car like that. And that's a totally valid conclusion if and when you have that much money. But just that statement is an example of something you don't see because it's everywhere for you. There's no such thing as just having a bunch of money. To have that money, you went out and did stuff that other people weren't willing to do, essentially to get it. Right? If you have an unusual amount of money, then it isn't so much that you worked hard or smart, but you found a way out of some assumption that other people had, and or you did something people weren't willing to do. As a matter of fact, generally the way to find an assumption, to identify an assumption that other people are making, that and that you realize they're making it, and then that causes you to find a solution. And this can completely apply to SEO client consulting, right? So let's suppose you were to see, wow, everyone is not seeing the following thing. And I see it now. And because of what I see, I can create a service or a value or a sales pitch or a niche or a USP, right? Unique selling proposition that is really going to help a lot of people and skyrocket my income. And when I say help people, you don't have to like cure cancer. If you're just like solving the problem they want solved, that's plenty for making money, especially while you need to make money. But in order to see that, probably how you got there was you decluttered something. You were willing, analogous to if people were willing to let go of taxation, then they would see stuff they don't see right now. But so interestingly enough, it's not smarts or brilliance that would get them to see how to do it right. It would be letting go of something that they're not willing to let go. Right. And so same thing with you. There's things that you're not letting go of, right? You need to like let go of the island and strike out into the water, right? Now you need some kind of lifeline or beacon to do that, right? You don't just want to drown. But in real life, I do this consistently and I'm able and properly where I'm not really risking drowning. You don't really need to take a risk in the way that people think in order to make a lot of money, for example, or to succeed in any other way that you want to succeed. It's not taking a risk. You actually can you can find a way to identify something that's clearly wrong. Like getting rid of taxation isn't a risk. It's necessarily wrong. Like it's very simple, extortion's wrong. So it's not a risk to get rid of it because it's clearly bad. Getting rid of something bad is just helpful. But people might not see how it's helpful yet, but you just have to see that it's unhelpful when you let go of it. So in order to make a lot of money in one sense, you let go of something that clearly can't be right, but that people generally aren't willing to let go of. One thing I was willing to do with OMG was not do it. And each year I'm willing to not do it. What I mean is, like, it wasn't so much, it's easy to see after the fact. It looks like, oh, I was smart enough to go ahead and find Greg, who was doing what he's preaching. But I found Greg and the situation opened up and I was able to really take advantage of it by not being willing to not go ahead with a make money program without someone like Greg. And there are a lot of people like Greg, and there was no one like Greg that I had found in years when I insisted on not doing something. And Greg's so awesome, less than, a little less than Greg, it's totally great. But when I opened up a space in a sense for him, and as I told the story before, it really pissed off the people that had invested in the infomercial in a sense. But they didn't invest on my products. I wasn't involved with the original deal. Right? So I wasn't breaking my word or anything. But there wasn't a way I was going to coach people without or have people have a coaching program unless there's some parameters, but I was willing to not do it. And that's a very hidden thing. You see, when people try to copy something like OMG, and we've made a difference in the marketplace. At this point, there's people doing it more right than they were before by far. like other courses and stuff. But generally, they're not willing to not do it, if that makes sense, in a certain way. But that's a critical difference. And that there's hidden things like that. The result is weird. It's almost hard to see because OMG exists. It looks like at least it can exist. But if you really look and think about it and run the numbers, as I mentioned before, I think, but it's 50 times more successful than anything that had come before, and things now too. But we can just leave that aside. I don't need to be competitive with anything right now. But there was like nothing like it in history of mankind that's had success like OMG. Like not even, it's not like it's even 20, even like 20% more successful than anything that had come behind would be a massive improvement if you think about it. But it's like not just 50% more, even double. It really is like 50 times more than virtually anything else. And of course, someone could parse numbers and say, wait, it's 40 times more. I don't know, but whatever it might be. So really, one interesting thing is that what it's going to take to really break through with money getting whatever, even to know that God exists, the only path to knowing that God exists or to knowing anything is to be willing to. The reason people feel, in one sense, uninterested in the question or whatever is that a lack of being able to let go of their existing certainty. The only way to actually know for absolute certain, absolute clarity that God exists is to be willing to ask one way or the other. And some people are, but many aren't. Either theists, like Christians and others, aren't willing to really open up the question for real for themselves. And then they can't know if you don't open up the question. So that's what it takes. It doesn't just take information. It takes letting go of what's clearly incorrect, which is the false certainty. And of course, someone that didn't want to believe, didn't want to open the question the other way, couldn't do it either. Almost universally, theists, people that believe in God, don't want to open up the question for real. They don't want to consider that God doesn't exist, and they can't get to where they know. And it's way different to know for real. When we talk about certainty, there's something I wanted to cover, a very, very practical, immediate value for you guys. One thing I want to talk about overall, and it's outside being stuck. I want to expand on the idea of bottlenecks and give you bottlenecks just brings to mind too little of the idea to point to with bottleneck and looking for them. And I want you to see the difference of how it is and why it is that minds don't actually seek out what I mean by bottleneck. And part of the expanded meaning of bottleneck would be to when you're running in circles or confined to a region where it looks like you're making progress or about to make progress, or there's at least a way to make progress without leaving your region or island or assumption or something. Again, like people think that there's a way to make progress in government without letting go of taxation, but there really isn't. We're going to be locked in where there's a lot of strife and a lot of problems and a lot of upsetment and anger forever unless we let go of taxation. There's just no way out. There's no improving it. Same thing with immigration. There's no right answer within our current assumptions people are making, or healthcare. There's no right answer. There's deeper assumptions you need to let go. You need to let go of basically medical licensing and things like that, fundamentally. Licensing of schools and doctors, deep things like that before there's any hope of solving the issue. Trying to solve it on the island they're on, so to speak, is not going to work. So it's not just that you want to look for bottlenecks. The mind easily tends to see obstacles, like on a path. It represents things in a way that it's geared toward that type of thing. But it really likes to feel certain that it's on the right place, because if it isn't, it feels stuck. Doesn't like to feel stuck, right? Fundamentally, you're afraid of being stuck. Imagine if you knew for sure you'd never be stuck. I'm about to get to the thing about conversions. But imagine just for a second, do a mental exercise. Imagine that you actually knew for sure that you could always make a real progress and you wouldn't be stuck, and you could get to not just the dumbed down BS version of succeeding that people have in their mind where their life ends and maybe the world's slightly better, but basically lots of people are still screwed. Suppose that everything will inevitably be wonderful and perfect, where there's no bad and there's ever increasing good, and that you were not going to get stuck on the way there. Even if your body died, there would be another chance in some way, another body or some such. Suppose, just as a mental exercise, imagine that you knew you were headed there and you knew that you weren't going to get stuck, that there might be a long journey, so to speak, but that you weren't going to be stuck and you were going to get. How does that feel? And let me ask you this. Does it feel different than how you normally feel? Because if it does, that means invisibly, always, because it's always there, You're assuming something different than, so you give up the game before you start. You assume you're going to lose, because anything other than that is presuming you're either going to be stuck or likely going to be stuck, or that by default you're going to be stuck, and that maybe if you struggle hard enough, maybe you won't be or something. But really think how it feels for a moment if things will be perfect and you're not going to get stuck, that you're on the way there and you won't get stuck. You're inevitably going to succeed in getting all the way there, where you're going to participate in a world where it's perfect, a world of some sort. If that feels different, you're presuming failure and you're having to redefine success into something lame, like having a bunch of money. It's great to have a bunch of money, but having a lot extra money or having extra women, right? People get the woman of their dreams and then they still want other women. Sometimes, not always. And plenty of times they don't. But just as an example, or zillions of examples of this. Here's where the mind screws up. Suppose that hammers, like the hammer you use for nails, are fairly rare and hard to find, and you need it for building a house. And you're building a house. And then you get a hammer and you get a backup hammer, right? And it's sturdy. You're okay. Then do you need 50 hammers? Or do you need to be so blown away by someone that has 50 hammers? No. Someone who has a good solid hammer and a backup, or whatever amount of reasonable backup, then they've taken care of the hammer situation. And it's a mistake of the mind to think that it's better to have more and more of such a thing. Now, if there's such a thing where more is always better, then that's one thing. But money is a lot like a hammer, where you really need it if you don't have it, if you stipulate you're building a house, right? And if they're hard to get, then it's worth putting a lot in. And if you need to build a house, and then therefore you need a hammer, then you need to do whatever it takes to get that hammer, and maybe to make sure you have a backup, right? And make sure it's a good hammer. But at some point, you don't need to just keep accumulating hammers. Now, it's also true that if you could happily keep getting hammers, then you could hand them out to other people or help other people make them or get them. And so it might be great to accumulate a lot of hammers, but it's not the only path. It's not the only thing. So there's no problem with making a ton of money. And a whole bunch of you could get to the 100 million range with me to help you, for goodness sakes. What I know is you'll see. What I know is ridiculous about success at this point. Just unbelievable. So if that's up your alley, if that's in the place that you're naturally at in life, where you just keep making more and more money, and that plenty of you will be, if that is the case, then great. If some number of potential significant others are a great match for us, maybe there's one in the world, maybe there's a bunch, but some number are a great match for any individual person. For some people, that match will be super duper attractive. For some people, the person will be attractive to them and reasonably attractive, but not like incredibly drop dead attractive for them. Right? So for some it will be, for some it won't naturally. And if a person who was trying to relate this to money, other things in life, right? Hopefully you get my point here, is that for some people making $100 million is right up their alley, just like for some people, finding an incredibly drop dead, gorgeous, significant other naturally makes sense for that person because that person's a great match. And since they're a great match, it makes sense to match up with, because you match up with someone you don't find who's not like super duper attractive, and there's another match for you that's way better, that you're even more attracted to. You might as well find the one that really works. But for plenty of people, right, and we could prove this, the world isn't populated by 100% super incredibly attractive people, myself included. And so it's obviously not true that everyone can and should have like a super duper incredibly attractive mate. So someone that finds such a mate shouldn't then think that sometimes they find such a mate or significant other, wife, husband, whatever, and then they get cocky or misinterpret what happened and say everyone could do this. But that's not the case. Same thing with money. Everyone doesn't need to make $100 million, but some can and should, right? And that can be part of how you help other people, right? Life is ultimately very simple. You need to take care of dealing with your basic panic, your basic survival situation in life. And then mostly it's about helping others in a way that suits you, right? Including clearing out mistakes and problems in your own mind that are blocking you for that, right? But life is no more complicated than that. But the mind will extrapolate things that were critical for survival when survival is no longer a real problem for you, or at least not a problem up until some major cataclysm happens in your life, then it'll feel like the hammer, right? Where it's like you want more and more of what you needed for survival. Same thing with people who have hangups about their childhood, right? Childhood is about survival, right? And it's that, I don't mean like your life is threatened when you're a child necessarily. For most of us, it isn't. But you're learning to just get along basically in the world, and you don't really have a survival plan yet. And so there's a whole bunch of things you need, including like how you deal with other people, and you need to even be obsequious to other people or please them, right? But then people will carry that on the hammer, right, and keep pleasing people when they no longer need to. Of course, you should be respectful and care about other people. And I call it also being like respectful and aggressive in a certain way, or just respectful. What did I call it in alchemy? I can't remember, but I describe it pretty well in there. A respectful alchemist is what I believe I call it. But that's another example of something that you let go, but the mind links it up. So the mind just associates all this is good, but it's good in that context, on that island of trying to survive. But then it's no longer necessarily necessary. All right, let me talk specifically about the 10 million. That's awesome. Let me skip over to, respectful alchemist. Hey, Wendy, how you doing? My slides have almost nothing on them, so I'm happily just ignoring them. They're there just as little guideposts. We talk about conversion and certainty. Some of you may have gotten to this, some of you may not have, or you might get to it, but then not realize how important it is. I'm going to go back to the dispenser post that you've seen the slide. It says conversion and certainty in categories. Everyone's Jen Cortes and gee, that's awesome. So with getting client, and this is the same thing as if you're getting customers on a website where you're not directly doing client SEO. There's getting people to buy your Amazon listing, whatever. But I'm going to specifically talk about client type of interactions, and then you can apply it to other things. What do we got here, a hammer? So let's see here. The bottleneck for your client in terms of selling the value that they're looking for is generally, I might have referenced this before, a little here and there, but their problem isn't so much they need traffic. That's chunking up too much. It's not helpful to go from this specific to the general at the wrong time. Or I could say there's plenty of times when that's not helpful, but people will do it anyway. So thinking that what you do is you provide traffic and you're selling like to people the ability to get traffic, that might not be the issue. The real issue that's more specific that you want to deal with is generally in the world right now, in today's day and age, 2017. The issue is one of a certain type of certainty that your potential client is going to want. So and I've seen this pitch, and I'm talking to an OMG in person who lives here, Jeremy Brasher is great. And he was giving me a pitch that he used that really worked well. But it addressed the real bottleneck that generally is going on with a lot of potential clients is they need to, what they want is a feeling of certainty about at least something. All right. Now, generally as one specific example, the certainty they might want is that their SEO person is competent. Right. Now, you could extend that certainty all the way to actual qualified leads, like the way Fletch does it. But what Cotton does, and nobody's right or wrong, I'm just giving you different examples of things that all. What Cotton did is he's eliminated he doesn't try to fight every certainty battle. He did not tell them for certain that they would get LOI. What he did was he created parameters. The way to get people certainty, including yourself, is you draw parameters. You can call them boundaries. Parameters is a more helpful word ultimately, or more on target with the nuance of what it means. You create parameters or a boundary or like a region, so metaphorically a region, in which they can be certain and are clear about it, and give them that great feeling of certainty within that region. And then if that works for them, great. And if it doesn't work for anyone, then, redo your own, right? You're looking for something that has value to people. And I'm going to get to that in a moment. There's a certain pervasive mistake that I think that not everyone makes, but that it's common enough that, or even probably hold some people that they're doing well, they can do even better. That I'll get to next, having to do with perceived value. But sticking with this certainty thing. So Cotton does not promise a return on investment, an ROI. He doesn't promise people will call. What he would say, and I don't know exactly what he says these days, But one thing that he did early on that he was very successful with was he would say to people, I'm like a taxi driver. I take your website and I drive it to the first page of Google, right? Or even the top position, right? On the first page of Google, depending on what you want to sell or whatever, or top 3, top 5. And that's what he would do. But he would give them certainty that he could do that. All right. Now he would do other things besides, but that's critical, especially these days, right? That's what they're looking for. I'm sorry, it depends on the person. It's not that everyone exactly is looking for that, but overall it's going to be very successful. And if you're blind that they're looking for that and you think they're looking for traffic and you're like, hey, I can get you traffic, but they're not looking for traffic so much. They're looking for certainty of competence. It'd be like if I needed tax advice or a lawyer for something, I might understand that I could find a lawyer. I don't need someone to take my case. I want someone to win the case, right? Or I don't want someone to give me legal advice. I want someone to give me correct legal advice about how to give me a feeling like I'm legally paying the least taxes I could. That would be my bottom line. That if someone were to give me a sales pitch that scratched that, which no one has, I haven't looked that hard. But if they were to give me a pitch and make me, and not just say it, but give me justification that worked for me, where I could feel like I could hand my issue to them and they would they give me the certainty that they competently deliver. If you generally are able to deliver this type of certainty in SEO or whatever in business, and when you realize that fundamentally people are looking for certainty, and overall in this series of webinars, you're going to really get familiar with certainty and how the mind interacts with it. And it's going to open all kinds of doors for you with your own mind and with interact with other people, and certainly for sales and value and making money. But Cotton didn't just say that. Cotton also was able to demonstrate ranking that he had, not for clients necessarily, but for his My City SEO sites. But there's a whole bunch of ways to do it. Jeremy does it without necessarily demonstrating a lot of ranking. He just does it. He just appears competent and makes a pitch that sounds like he's competent. And he's a competent guy, and he's gotten traffic in other ways for people. But one way or the other, you need to create parameters in which there's certainty. In terms of selling OMG, by the way, which is what I do, what I've done, is I don't give people certainty in terms of guaranteeing like that they'll make money or even giving. The great thing about offering a refund policy is that it gives people a type of certainty. And that's a selling point, and it can be very helpful. I, for other reasons, didn't want to do that. But just like Cotton didn't want to bother with worrying about whether someone's website converted, you pick your battles and your parameters. But within the parameters that I created, there was a lot of certainty. Like I told a story that was true, or I gave a pitch, so to speak, for OMG, or I combined with other whatever I say, I with OMG. I'm not in any way ever taking credit for all of OMG or something I didn't do, but just to use shorthand for the part that I designed. Then within parameters, for example, you could be certain it's like of a competence thing, right? You were getting SEO from people who were monetizing it, originally Greg and then Fletch, who were monetizing it, who were doing it, and they were ranking sites. And you could see we had many example sites that were ranked for that. And now there's a bunch of My City SEO sites and stuff that people can see. And so there's certainty of competence. The reason I was willing, didn't need to do like a make money niche info product. I could succeed. I understood how to do info products in general. And plus I just not going to sell something that's not going to fulfill what it promises. But so it's not just that I know how for people to make money in general. Part of it involves specifically SEO, search optimization. It's a unique type of opportunity because there's a whole bunch of things worked into the nature of SEO itself that help make it really work for people. And so people can see progress, which people tend to need to see in order to keep going. And the problem is that that's the way people get stuck, is people will need to like make money in order to believe they can make money. They're eternally stuck in that way. I look at many kind of prospects in this niche, so to speak, people looking for ways to make money or make money online or online marketing. They're stuck, not at home, but overall in the prospect pool, so to speak. People are on the email list and stuff. They're stuck in an impossible cycle where they feel like they need to see it work, or they have like a stylist that needs to see it work in order to justify their next purchase or putting time into it in order for them to stick with it. But they don't know how to make it work. And what people needed was something where they can make progress that was like stepwise, that where it was digestible in a way that was actually on the way to them making money, not just fake progress that looked like progress. A kind of way to make progress that doesn't necessarily lead far, like all the way would be with paid ads. Like you can run ads and get some leads on an email list and even maybe make some sales, but it's not really going to, for a lot of people, that's not going to lead to making money. For plenty of people do make money that way. It's totally legitimate. But a lot of people, that type of progress can, people can fake duck. So someone can run paid ad, make some sense of progress or a few sales to an affiliate offer and still not be making money and really not be anywhere near close to actually making a real, and like they might just be basically headed in the wrong direction or not making progress in the right direction. With search engine optimization, if you're ranking a website, even for a fairly simple keyword, then you're making progress in a direction that's definitely going to help like any business, like any endeavor you have. And also no matter what your skills. I tried in my 20s before I started succeeding nonstop with making money. I started succeeding nonstop. Actually, it wasn't even nonstop because I tried other things after. So when I was, I think literally 20, exactly 20, in between my second and third year of university at UVA, I did Southwestern, which is like you're selling these study guides door to door. They recruit from college kids and they train you during the year with self training and stuff. And then over the summer, you travel somewhere and try to sell the books. And I didn't do that. Basically, I felt like no one was home because no one was home. They told me I was being negative, but regardless of my attitude, people weren't like home. That might have been an attitude thing, but given that I now became a multimillionaire, then it helped me to understand that although some people were successful with that and other things, there's still something to finding some kind of match for yourself, at least. And that really wasn't a match for me. You also had to have a lot of like physical endurance. And I'm not like a slug, but I don't have a lot of physical endurance. And it really helped to have a car. And they said you didn't need a car. And I guess theoretically you didn't, but at some point it was majorly helpful. So that didn't end up very successful. Then I tried network marketing, tried Amway itself. And then later I did Free Life, which worked out a little bit better. But I didn't have like basically success with any of them. But one thing that was interesting was when I was 21, probably, I think it was, then my fourth year at university, I started doing my accelerated learning, my speed reading and stuff. And I succeeded at that. Not where I wasn't like a millionaire or anything, but I made $10,000 while I was in school, which at the time was like wildly more than other people would make. People wouldn't even make 1,000 or 2,000 hardly working at a job while they're in school. And then that was the beginning of me doing information product stuff. And I haven't lost track of my train of thought here. The point there is, in one sense, you want something that's a match for you. But the cool thing with getting free traffic and search engine and getting a sense of with search engines is that whatever what your particular kind of strengths are or things that are going to kind of work for you in making money, search engine optimization is going to be helpful. Another thing that was difficult about what I was doing was that the products weren't that great or that in demand or whatever, but SEO is like super valuable, like for a lot of people. And you don't have to do SEO client consulting, but the great thing is you have it as like a fault, right? Like whatever other path you take with doing search engine related stuff, even with Amazon, you are also building a service, an ability to do a service that is super fun, right? Super something you can do. And even someone that isn't focused on client consulting can generally pick up clients over the course of a year or two, even with hardly trying, at least one or two. And then if you do a good job, you can often get referrals. Because why? Because the bottleneck has to do with the certainty issue, right? So once you deal with that particular issue of certainty regarding competence, regarding the SEO consultant, and that's what the person is looking for, not like traffic, then focus on that and win that battle. That's like knowing like keyword to really go after, especially if it's long tail, that if you really want to win a fairly easy keyword, you could do it. If you really want to look competent, you can work it out. I made a series of 10 things that would help you with client consulting, right? That's in the members areas like over a year ago, I think it was. And one example of appearing competent is knowing exactly what you're going to do after the client signs on with you. Others are just to rank sites for keywords. Doesn't have to be My City SEO. Joe and Cotton came up with that awesome time travel SEO thing where you can rank for keywords plus the date, like a year, but whatever it might be. But SEO is great because it's stepwise in that way. And plus it's applicable. You can have so many different diverse strengths and weaknesses, and still something with dealing with search engines these days is going to be huge for you with making money. And it's going to pretty much give you such an advantage or such a foothold, a better way to even put it, that, or it's going to mix in with whatever else you're doing and amplify it so nicely that if you had any chances of succeeding without it, think about it. This is how partly how I think of something. Like I think of if something's true, then something else. Oh, that's cool. Paul did free life too. That's awesome. And nutritional supplements with Roman Dow and stuff, growth to vitamin bio. Anyway, I interrupted myself here. I was saying something important. One thing I do consistently with planning and thinking is if something's true, that something smaller and easier is often true. So if you had any hope, and people don't realize it, this logic doesn't occur to people, but if you are going to succeed without understanding search engines, then for sure, then if you understand how to get some search engine traffic, then you're going to only succeed better, right? Nobody is going to be where they were going to succeed, but they got sidetracked by learning SEO for several months, and now they're not going to succeed. Like, no matter what path you were going to have to any kind of business success, worst possible case, it could delay it a little bit and give you a return that maybe wasn't totally necessary, but basically in 99+% of the cases, like the worst cases is it'll slightly not be worth it for a tiny percentage of people, possibly. I don't even know if it'll happen to anyone. But then for anyone else, they're just going to be better off. And the bang per buck is going to be pretty major anyway, like being able to get search engine traffic for whatever else they were going to succeed at anyway. And no one stipulates that they can't possibly succeed, period, or they wouldn't be doing anything, right? So you think of it that way. So I was talking about certainty. I was giving different examples. I was giving the example of what I did with OMG, right? Just to get another example, I gave you the example with Cotton, with Fletch, where he makes it so the phone actually rings in a lot of cases and does call tracking, or he gets the lead and he sells the leads and he has a deal for leads. So that's his way of providing certainty, right? And he could look competent in various other ways too. And he at least does most of his work, or did most of his work in niche where he knew well. So it's more competence, more certainty. He knew just how to talk to them, and he's branched out since. Of course, Fleck could speak for himself, but just giving you a general overview that I know. That would just take for the sake of explaining my concept here of the certainty, of addressing that issue of competence, certainty about competence, right? So certainty about competence was the real issue, that if you deal with that selling point, you're going to be pretty much wildly successful with getting clients. Maybe the world will shift in some major way at some point, but that's how it is now. And then what I did with OMG, I wasn't willing, just like you shouldn't be willing to give certainty in ways that you don't know you can deliver, that is not going to be worth the bang per buck for you. It's not going to be worth promising. It'll cause you more of a headache. Or maybe you'll promise it in a year. Maybe there's things that next year you'll have the clarity, confidence, and experience to promise that you don't promise now. I don't need your do no refunds, right? It came up with the event, the Ride the Wave event that's coming up in July, which by the way is absolutely awesome. It's turning out to be incredible. The guests, the speakers, totally. And then with the tapes from last year with Jordan Belfort and everyone else, and with Mike's mastermind tapes, it's turning out to be a huge, big deal. And I didn't knew it'd be reasonable when we started it, but it's turned out to be way better than I hoped, or that I even tried to make happen or plan for. It just naturally happened. So strongly consider that if you're not in it. But with that, Mike was thinking that, we wouldn't do refunds because we don't do refunds for NHP. I said, no, we do refunds. It's an event. People, things could come up, but there's a certain amount, about $250 in this case, $250 is not refundable. That's our fixed cost for even just the merchant fees of collecting and refunding it. And then there's a little bit of dealing with making the reservations and so forth. But that's natural amount. And then the rest on So I don't only do no refunds. And there's other times in my life and products where I could easily do refunds in the future. But with NHB and some other things we've done, I didn't want to deal with it for a number of reasons. So I had to provide certainty in other areas. And the fact that Greg and then Fletch and then others were actually doing it for real, had proof of that. And that's who you're interacting with, is certainty regarding competence, right? And I address that directly, like it directly goes to that issue. And when you think about it, that's the bottleneck in a lot of ways. Or there's other ones, but that's a major one with prospects in my niche, so to speak, of the kind of internet marketing, people looking to succeed with that. It's not the same as getting clients, client consulting. I think that the surge regarding competence is more important with getting clients for client consulting, actually. But it's a significant part of the ingredients is the competence there. And certainly I won that. We'll make sure to win that battle or have a way to address it that worked well for a lot of people. Suzanne says Cotton does go over what he says to customers in many of his recorded training. Yeah, it comes up, and Cotton will continue to talk about that. Is my accelerated learning course available? No, basically is so it's not that I'm trying to make it available. It was never an online course. It was in person. It was on campus at UVA for college students. And the speed reading part of it involved a device that looked like a Walkman that helped pace you that I haven't ordered for years. It's just one guy that made it, that invented it, had a patent on it or has a patent on it and got it manufactured. I don't know his number even at this point. And maybe I could find it and maybe he still has them. I'm not sure. But it wasn't even, I didn't even buy it, that ReadMate thing as a course. Sorry, as a business. It was just sold one of those business seminar things where they sell you different little home businesses before the internet, essentially. All good, David. Very accurate. Good. I'm glad when I put words in Fletch's mouth, they were basically the correct words. Fletch wrote, interesting. I realized that the model I chose to make money in my path was one I was quite certain about making money with, reflective on what I chose to offer as well as how and why customers purchase from me. Yeah. Yeah. That like when we're going to be exploring certainty. I talked about it in that first kind of original Crushing the Game webinar I did about a month or more where I didn't even really post the recording. It was good. I just wanted to start from scratch. There was no necessarily problems with it. I thinking of editing a bit and I just didn't. But then Mike ended up accidentally making it available anywhere for people that had the link. So that was good. But we're going to get really far by taking a look at how the mind deals with certainty. And again, both for other people and for our own minds. Did you see that before you chose, or did you choose a path and stick with it? You got to hop on one of Fletch's, and you might do this regularly anyway, but you can ask Fletch on Sunday too. But it gives a good question to ask Fletch about, as you can explore this idea of how he created that certainty about competence. And again, you don't necessarily need certainty about a return on investment or something. And if you go for the wrong type of certainty, you promise things that you can't necessarily deliver, then the problem is going to be later down the road. And because the certainty about competence is such a big deal, that means referrals are such a bonanza in the client consulting niche. Like with what I do, referrals are basically irrelevant, right? Neither, for pretty much, for certainly for customers, and then even for getting affiliates, it's somewhat helpful or reasonably helpful. I mean, that's much more important with getting affiliates, with kind of referrals and stuff. But anyway, at least that's where it's at. That doesn't help with customers hardly at all. Just a little bit. It's just not that type of product. However, with SEO consulting, it's huge because of the competent thing. Just like with a good professional in a number of ways, right? Lawyer, accountant, doctor, dentist. If you want someone competent, you generally are looking for, right? I also put the word categories. I just want to reinforce something. I'll probably delve into it further, but also this relates as well to the idea of being stuck like on an island where it looks like you're trying to make progress, at least, and you're trying, and it looks like you think if I just persevere and keep going, I'll get there. But if you're on an island and what you're trying to get to is not on the island that you're on, then you need to figure out that you're on the wrong island and how to get to the other island and so forth, or at least leave the island you're on. When I heard a webinar where Cotton was talking to people on the phone and helping them, and it made me part of my motivation for consult Crushing the Game series, is some of the questions people asked involved something that I could particularly help with, in addition to Cotton. But Cotton and I tend to have different parts of the puzzle, which is why I value him so much. But then there's the stuff that I think about and research is different in many cases from what he's working on. So there's parts of the puzzle that I have that were going to be very critical for some people that were asking questions, and they would say that they were trying something over and over again and it wasn't working, and what were they missing? But sometimes it's not just something missing, right? For example, when I was trying to sell door to door or doing network marketing, it wasn't necessarily in that case that I was missing, just that I was missing something that was on the, my point is that if you assume you don't leave the island, and if your question about what you're missing inherently means I'm staying on the island, but what am I missing on the island? then you're not going to find it. Right. So again, you're on an island. What you want isn't on that island. And then if you ask what you're missing, but you, without realizing necessarily mean, what am I missing on the island I'm on? Then you're not going to find the answer, because what you're missing is that you need to leave the island and go somewhere else. So there's assumptions that the person might not be questioning that they would need to question. So if they were in the wrong category, so with getting clients, and similar with making sales online, any kind of sale, you can do all kinds of things right and tick off all kinds of boxes in the book Influence and so forth, Robert Cialdini's iconic book. You can do all sorts of social proof, this, that, and the other thing. But in some cases, if you get stuck in the wrong category in people's minds, then the only way to make the sale is to get out of that category and into the right category in their mind. One example I've given in the past is like us versus them. If you're an other or a them, if you're not a member of a group that they're currently identifying with, that they feel identified with, then they might not really want to buy from you and they might not know why. Or you might be saying things, but, oh, you see in politics where the same exact action by Obama or Trump, depending on someone's political leanings, will be viewed totally differently. So it's almost the exact same action, right? What's the difference? The difference is the category, right? Trump is in one category, either on our side or on the other side, right? Or Obama, same thing. And based on whether they're an us or a them, everything else is identical except for the us or them category. And that just in some cases, a couple of examples, but sometimes they do the same thing. They do the same thing overseas and say the same type of thing, or the same thing domestically, or the same type of lie. Or there's a leak, right? If it might mean incompetence if it's Trump, but the leaker was wrong if it was Obama, or vice versa, right? Or when the famous example where Bush did one, reversed an abortion thing, and Clinton did an abortion thing in terms of funding abortion with overseas money, right? That was given to overseas. And to the news, who obviously leans towards Clinton, then they said they framed Clinton's thing as keeping a campaign promise, and they framed Bush as pandering to conservatives or pandering to the far to put him there or something, right? But exact same action, essentially. In other words, keeping a campaign promise about abortion. The exact same action in terms of as far as their framing. In either case, you could see it as pandering, or you could see it as keeping a promise, but it looked different, right? So the same thing is happening with you and getting clients. If you get put in an us versus them category, or if you get put in if you're reaching out to someone with cold, then it's possible to make this fail. But part of making this fail is to get yourself out of the category of, I desperately reached out to you as a stranger, right? And I'm maybe inherently incompetent if I have to be doing that to get client, right? I don't mean that you're incompetent for doing that. I'm saying that it could feel to someone else like you're desperate, right? Which implies incompetence, not logically, but by association, it can imply that. So I don't mean that it logically implies you're incompetent if you're doing that, but it can feel that way, just like with dating, right? You just walk up to a stranger and ask them on a date, then when you're 30, then it's, wow, no one you've met in the last 30 years wants to go on a date with you, so you have to talk to strangers. That's a problem. In actuality, that's totally reasonable to get to a place, right? Completely. However, it still feels like that in a lot of cases. So if you are going to do that, you need to find a way to start by jumping that category out of that, by in some way making them come towards you or agree to something in some way that flips the category in their mind, where you're no longer like reaching out and trying to grab them or whatever, like desperately, or however you want to characterize it. But again, if you're reaching out to someone cold, the way to success is to flip that sense of things, where you do something, where you dangle something and they come towards you after that. Or if you're, the one thing that some pickup artists do is they kind of talk to the person over their shoulder, and it's like they're about to walk away. They just make a bit of a comment, and then the other person might take the kind of bait and then start talking, like asking them about what they mean or responding to them of their own volition, but it's not responding to a desperate what's your name. It's like some comment or say something, and then the person then reaches toward them, right? That flips the script or the category. So I talked about this in alchemy in one of the webinars in the 20s, maybe roughly around 24, 25, 26. But I want to remind you or reinforce it or let you know to look at that when it comes to conversion. The stuff that I've been discovering has led me back around to how powerful and how important that is to think in terms of that. And it's similar to like it relates this idea of getting stuck in a way that you don't realize you're stuck, right? Because you could be reaching out to people, getting a response and so forth. And then people say, then I write to them and then it's like cold. They don't respond back to me. If that keeps happening, then you got in the wrong category. And that naturally leads me, and this is a little bit, I haven't planned exactly just for this first starting out. I thought I would just talk about some things that would be helpful and see how things worked. And then over time, some order will emerge from the chaos. And not necessarily on this one, but as we go on. But that leads me to something I want to talk about where, remember I mentioned earlier, imagine a world in which you know that things are heading towards perfection. You're not going to be somewhat similar to that. I want you to imagine something. So let me get my train of thought back, actually. So we're talking about categories not being stuck with confusion and, okay. And it has to do with goals. Ah, there's an amazing thing. I've been looking for this by knowing that there's something wrong with the way that, even with all the progress I'd made regarding understanding goals and things related to it, there was still something that I wasn't seeing or that and so I see either all or a lot more now. And I've had some major breakthroughs with it. Some of it might look a bit like before, but I have additional clarity. But to me, it's significantly different upgrade. So sorry, it keeps a little bit slipping. I'm well aware of the concept I've thought about a lot that just, it's on the edge of my train of thought at the moment. I'm going to do a not talk, revealing goals rather than setting them. So this is as the contrast to this, as you see the difference between how this is normally done and why, and then how to do it differently, is this could be massive. So it turns out that you want to fully, like, the whole idea of setting goals is wrong. And you're going to want to let goals reveal themselves. And it's going to make an immense difference once we really see the full difference that I'm talking about, the full thing that I'm talking about. The fascinating thing, if a goal, let's suppose that a goal reveals itself like you're going to meet a client. Now, obviously, if you're going to meet a potential client, then you obviously would want to see if they're a good match. And then if they are, you want them to sign on with you. And nearly everyone might be a reasonably good match, by the way. I don't mean that they're like, it's not like dating where a small percentage of people might be a good match, right? With potential clients, you might want most of them to sign on with you, but not all. Or maybe even if it was all, what I'm saying is the same. When you think in terms of goals revealing themselves, then that's constantly and naturally in flux. See, I knew to get to this point, but I didn't know the context that wouldn't keep making you swim upstream with the following, with what I'm about to say. The minute the the minute the sale is not going to work out, then the goal of having that person as your client, or at least getting them to say yes right now, you might still generally be open, of course, to the person becoming your client in the future, but the goal goes right away instantly. Because if you see, they're the way that by letting goals reveal themselves, they're by the nature of how you look at it in general, as you see what I'm trying to get to here, is they're constantly revealing themselves based on new information or how things unfold. So if I'm hoping to do a certain thing with my time and then chance, um, let's say I might be thinking that I'm going to go do whatever activity when I get home, but I pull in and chance hears me pull in and he opens the door and he's jumping up and down and he knows exactly what he wants to do with me, right? What I want me to do, and it involves something with him. And he literally jumps up and down. And if I say yes, he'll literally say hooray. And he's extremely cute and endearing. And so depending on the situation, in a lot of cases, I can, as a matter of fact, do what he is hoping for me to do for a little while. And then that also means that it's not hanging on my head for later. I would prefer to take care of that. And then he's chilled out and then I can do my stuff instead of doing my stuff knowing that I have to at some point go spend time with him. It's not that I do or don't want to spend time with him, but if I know that I have to do something, then it makes it less it saps my energy and it's not as pleasant for me. So it's often more pleasant for me to do it at that moment. So that I might have been, one thing might have seemed like I was revealing itself, so to speak, like that I was going to do, but then I pull in and he's doing that. And so then there's new information, there's a new situation. And so something new revealed itself, given the totality of the situation, including, oh, and when I had my notebook in my car today and it was an hour and 20 minutes before the webinar and in my car's in the garage. And so I went to see if the garage is open and it wasn't. So then I went to back in my basement office and clicked to open it. And then I walked back to go there and it closed it. And then right up there, closed the garage again. And the same thing happened again. So then I walked in the front door. And then when I walked in the front door to go into the garage to the house, then, because I had a door, it's great. I have a door where I can go straight out my basement, right? Which is not, and make my own outfit, but also this is where I play games and, and so forth, all that stuff. So he had a plan for what he would love for me to do, and it involved doing something with him. And he was very excited and jumping up and down, but I had the webinar. And so given the totality of the situation, in that case, I wasn't going to do something with him. But earlier today, similar thing, before noon, and I did play with him for a while. But the interesting thing is, when you look at goals as revealing themselves instead of being set, now you can do all the good of setting goals you can get from stipulating them, but stipulating is different because it has and this will all make further sense. You'll have a greater context to understand this as we continue with the series, because we'll talk about certainty. We'll talk about a number of things that will really open your eyes about how the mind works and how more than that works. But even with what I'm telling you now, you could start to use this pretty well, I think. So you have this sense of goals revealing themselves. And then whenever there's new information, that can change. That keeps them from getting set in your mind, kind of like the hammer thing that I talked about, where it's like the mind starts to associate, oh, hammer is good. And so more hammers are better. That's how the mind simplistically associates. Same thing is a goal will get set in your mind. And then the mind gets in a habit of just wanting to always go after the goal that it already has in it. And then everything's like an interruption of annoyance, right? Or a lot of stuff is. Or obstacles that weren't foreseen, and annoyances, frustrating and so forth. And it's not just that they're frustrating and you feel bad, but then you'll react maladaptively constantly, right? Because you'll be going after, you'll feel inertia, like a car, like inertia towards a goal that's outdated, including people functionally have goals for stuff that's literally in the past. And so they actually want to change the past, logically speaking, all the time. Another thing people will have goals for, they'll have a goal. They want something outside of their control to happen. And you don't really need to have it be that way. And the way to make that work is to continue to understand what I mean about revealing goals. So you can have an objective that is like provisional, constant, based on the information at hand. But then whenever there's new information, there's a certain way you can understand the world where you don't have to think about doing this. It just naturally, the goals adjust to the situation, but in a useful way, not in kind of a dumbing down your standards or giving up way, right? But just reacting rationally to new information in a way where if a client says no, then it's most adaptive to respond well to that. And specifically what you want to do. Another thing I wanted to get to, which is it's all related and it's all unified ultimately. And today, again, I'm just talking and setting the stage, directly telling you a whole bunch of stuff as well as I can. But while understanding that, maybe it'll make more sense as we continue and have more of a framework. But there's nothing wrong with kind of going directly after things. As a matter of fact, that's what I was about to say right now, is when you fundamentally look at life, there's an overall strategy that you can always use that kind of can really frame your life as a whole. And it's the following. And I've said something like this before, but I really have clarity on it now. You want to be on a playing field in which it's rigged where you can succeed, which then means that you only need to deal with bottlenecks, being unstuck, being with like bottleneck-like things like you don't even have to be on the right island, so to speak. You just have to be in the right world where the island that you need exists. And then if you look at life, seeing whether you're in the right region, seeing whether sometimes something's getting mixed in with your life that is constantly unhelpful, like a number or an attitude about money, or or an attitude about money where people have this like sense where there's something wrong with making it. That's an example. It's not exactly like you're on an island, and it's not exactly a bottleneck, but it's like something that keeps getting mixed in with what you're doing that's unhelpful. It's like a headwind. Like a headwind is like a wind blowing the wrong way when you're flying somewhere, like towards you, when you want to go. It's like a current that's going in the wrong direction. It's always mixing with your, let's say you're rowing against these different metaphors, but they're all similar. Let's say you're rowing and but you're against the current. Then the current is always mixing unhelpfully with what you're doing. You're not on the wrong island. You're not having exactly a bottleneck, but you're having something mixing with what you're doing that's constantly unhelpful. And the end result might be that you're not going to get where you need to go. Or it's going to take you so much energy and to get to, or just to stay even, right? And so you end up rowing and rowing, but you don't end up getting to where you need to go. And suppose you could even row and make progress, but suppose you need escape velocity, to put yet another metaphor in. Suppose that you, for whatever reason, you need to be going 30 miles an hour, or you need to be able to go several miles in a day in order to reach your destination on time. Then even if you could row and make progress against the current, you're not going to get where you need to get to in time, or the ROI is going to be worth it. Right? That can happen sometimes with paid traffic. Other times you can have a wildly successful business involving paid traffic. But often people, especially when they're amateurs with business, and that's not a bad thing, everyone starts out there, then paid traffic creates enough of a current against them with the money it takes. Even the fact that the person came to them by clicking on a paid ad, if you don't know what you're doing to hop categories properly, then it's a lot like cold calling to do a paid ad. And you're starting on the wrong foot, so to speak, for category. And if you don't realize to get out of that category properly with your funnel, then you'll say all the otherwise right things, but you won't make sales and you won't know why. So another type of bottleneck is this current against you, or something mixing, or an assumption, or a number in your head from when you were growing up of how much money is normal to make. And it's hard to, after you get to that number, you start to feel unmotivated. You don't know why, right? So all of those things can be like my expanded idea of things that make you stuck, or what I used to talk about bottlenecks, but I want you to have an expanded idea of all the different ways to get stuck or not be able to. Again, even the worst type of stuck is when you think you're making progress and maybe you can get there, but you're never going to get there but you can, if you deal with the headwind, or the thing that's mixing in, or that number in your head that shouldn't be there, that standard of how much money you think you deserve to make, or you can make, or that you're motivated to make. And then you wonder what happens after you hit that number and you still do not make more, or you make more temporarily, but then you wonder if you're sabotaging yourself. So fundamentally, you want a situation where it's possible to succeed, and then you focus on all these various things that get you stuck, including the most deceptive, the one that really fools everyone, is when they think they're making progress. People talk about growth, deal with this internally in OMG sometimes, people think they want monthly growth sometimes, or Rapid Crush dealt with this too. They even admitted to Mike, talked to one of them, and they said they would make suboptimal decisions because they were obsessed with just having that, like hitting that next month's quota. That's the exact way to not get off your local peak, is to need growth on a certain time frame, right? In order to have growth, then you have to get off sometimes if you're on a local peak, you need to go through a valley, but it's not a valley. It's only a valley looked at the wrong way. Technically, looked at one way, it's a valley, but if you're heading straight to the right peak, or a better peak, then there's no valley at all. You're just being smart. As a matter of fact, you're being pretty brilliant to understand that's the direction to go to get to the right place. But if people are watching you and they say, oh, growth is so critical, but what they really mean by accident is, what I want to do in life is never go through a valley and only climb up a hill. You can't only climb up a hill if you're short-sighted. You need to be able to let go of things that are a local peak in order to get to a better peak. That doesn't mean you have to have creative destruction all the time. It doesn't mean you have to break up with people just because you don't think a relationship's working. It doesn't mean you have to quit a business because it's not working, or try a whole different niche or a whole different thing. SEO consulting might be the exact great thing for you, but you might be stuck on some other thing that you can figure out. So people misidentify the island and they throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? So don't misinterpret me that way. I'm not just saying quit this, quit that, but I'm also not saying persevere. So again, as we start to delve into this, what's the real thing that's getting us stuck fundamentally is, again, epistemology, which is how do we know what's really correct? Okay. Now, that leads me to something I was about to mention, which is very practically helpful, which is this that will deal with the whole issue of taking action. Do I take action? Do I learn? Do I theorize? Do I think about things? Do I reflect? How do I know? And also, when people take action, they tend to feel burned sometimes or frustrated. There's failure. There's a certain way to look at things and all of this is unified in my mind at this point. So it all relates. I'm kind of talking about this and that, but they're all about the same type of thing. You take action. There's no failure, not because, there's no, it's totally reasonable and correct to say there's no failure. There's only feedback. That's the thing Tony Robbins says, and it's not false. However, we can have a greater context where that makes even better sense. That people can hear that, and it's not enough. You need to understand more thoroughly and deeply. And so, because what people will do is they'll have an overall worldview that involves failure, and then they'll hit failure, and it'll feel like failure and be failure based on their context. And they'll try to tell themselves, oh, no, it's not failure, just failure. No, if you see the world wrong and you do things, you have all these contradictions, and then you feel like you fail, then you set yourself up. If you set yourself up for failure, then you can have failure. It's possible to make plans, like I said before, that don't involve failure. And here's how: is again, there's two things going on. You want to be in a situation where it's possible to succeed in whatever that might mean, and then you focus on not being stuck and not focus on progress. Because when you focus on progress or growth, then you end up getting stuck in a local peak. It's the wrong place to look. Don't worry about progress in the wrong way. Don't worry about results. What happens when people think about results is surface behavior, surface results. Looking like they're climbing, getting a person to do what they want, and they think they made progress because the person did what they insisted the person did. So I take action, not hoping I will succeed, but of course I'm going to succeed. See, if you set things up properly, you don't even need to assume success. It's logically necessary that you'll succeed. If you're on a playing field where it's possible to succeed, and then all you're going to do is keep on bridging and getting rid of assumptions and getting rid of things that are going to keep you from succeeding, then you're going to succeed 100%, guaranteed. So I already understand that, and I'm already doing that with whatever I do. And then it's not a question of success. So once there's no longer a fear of being stuck, then everything transforms. And the right way of approaching things reveals itself, which is you take action in order to see whether there's a bottleneck, so to speak, a bottleneck or any of these other types of stuff things. And I'll list them next time more systematic. But any of these things, you're in the wrong region. There's something getting mixed in with what you're doing that's causing a headwind, or it's like you're rowing against the current, and it's like seem like you're making progress, but you end up in the same place. You're doing the equivalent of running in circles, or you're even literally making progress, like you're rowing and actually moving towards your destination, but you're spending so much energy and effort that your ultimate success is not going to be possible. Much like with certain businesses that rely on paid ads, not always. Plenty of successful models that do have paid ads, but they can create such a headwind for a lot of people that they're never going to be really profitable. So any one of those things that's basically making you stuck, even if you're supposedly in one way making some progress, you just do that. And this isn't theory. I absolutely do this. I'm just trying to figure out how to explain it and how to understand it better myself, so that sometimes if I don't do it as well, that I wouldn't make that mistake. Right. So I do it for myself to figure out how to not screw it up sometimes. But overall, this is where my success has come from. And I do this a lot. And now that I understand it and I'm doing it more consistently, it's terrific. It totally works. So there's no such thing as failure, literally, not because I tell myself there's no such thing as failure. And you can say, David, how do you know that you could succeed? Let me ask you something. Is it possible in this world to make enough money to basically feed yourself, pay for health insurance, pay for what you need? Clearly, yes. It's not that complex. And you don't really need to worry about that too. If somehow, even if it's not possible, the same exact formula is going to make sense, because you're just going to, by taking action and acting, you could just stipulate that it's possible. Sometimes you eyeball something, it's so obviously reasonable, and then you stipulate it. And then if it turns out, which means you knowingly operate as if it's true, understanding that you don't know for sure that it's true, but it's a completely reasonable guess. So you stipulate, which means you act as if it's correct. but you don't believe, sorry, you believe it's correct if you define belief properly, which is what you act on. But you don't say that you know it. You don't say that, you don't assume it. It's completely opposite. Stipulating and assuming is exactly opposite in a sense. Of course, it's the same genre of thing. But to assume means, or the way minds work is they try to fabricate certainty until and unless you realize not to do this. But you don't try to feel certain or prove that it's right. You just stipulate it, which means you don't know whether it's right. And then if it turns out to be right, great. And if you find out that it's wrong, then that reveals itself and you just stipulate something else, or you realize something for sure and you don't have to stipulate at all. You just understand something and then you go from there. So it's perfectly reasonable to stipulate that it's possible to make money, right? Given that lots of people do it. It's even reasonable to stipulate that you can become a millionaire. Okay. And it's also basically necessary, at least over the course of your life, you're going to spend over $1 million probably. Not necessarily if you have a family or whatever, certainly to be like reasonably comfortable for a lot of people. But whatever that number is for you, I'm not trying to increase it at all. Whatever reveals itself, right? You don't have to freaking set it. You figure it out, right? $3 million roughly for me revealed itself. I didn't set it as a goal. I've calculated, right? That's about what I would need to take care of money. So I wouldn't be desperate for money for the rest of my life. And then I could, if something I wanted to do for money, great. But if I didn't, wouldn't have to, I wouldn't be trapped by money. So that's very reasonable. So let's suppose that's possible. Let's stipulate that it's possible. Not the same as convincing yourself it's true that it's possible. It's just totally reasonable. And so you eyeball it and you stipulate. Now that's taken care of. So now you're on a playing field in which it's possible to make money. Now all you do is focus on what is the sticking points, what's sticking you. Headwinds, the wrong region, or just a bottleneck that you can break, a bridge that you can build, right? Maybe there's just a river between you and where you want to get to. You have to build a bridge over it. Maybe you're in the wrong category. You have to bridge yourself to a different category with a potential client, and then they'll say yes. And it'll seem like magic. But it's just one category you didn't realize that the person was putting you in. And that you have to act and talk your way out into a different, better category, right? That's like an example of a bridge that's similar to a sticking, like you're stuck until you build the bridge. That was your bottleneck or obstacle holding you back. So bridges, regions, headwinds, bottlenecks, a tree fall on the road, you just have to knock the tree out. That's the kind of thing your mind is naturally good at. Is there's an obstacle like a tree and you smash it, right? Or you go around it, climb over it. That in mind already does well. But then because it does that, it tries to see that as the only thing. That if I just get around all the obstacles, then, or don't have any, hope not to have them, right? Get through, batter through an obstacle or get around it, then that's how I succeed. The problem is that ignores headwinds, being in the wrong region when you need a bridge and so forth. Mind is reasonably good at finding bridges, although the category thing it might not see to build a bridge. Right? So you need to become, the great thing is when you look at life and success in this way, with all these different ways dealing with being stuck, including ways that you didn't realize about being stuck before, then what happens? In a meta way, you get good at understanding about things that can stick you and how to unstick. So I've spent so long focusing on what really ends up having things get stuck that I have so much depth and knowledge and experience. I'm like an expert. I don't mean that I know it all, but I'm functionally speaking an expert in the sense of focusing on it and dealing with it for so long. And that you get good at the meta strategy of dealing with things that stick you. At first, when you start to focus on things that stick you, you're like an amateur. But you don't have to feel impatient. The great thing is you're both going to do better achieving the kind of the thing you're trying to achieve. And you're going to get good at dealing with the meta thing of being stuck in the first place, of dealing with spotting different ways that you're stuck. And now you can understand that you don't go into anything in terms of course, there's an objective. You need an objective to make this whole thing work. And there's constantly objectives that reveal themselves. And so obviously, if you're going to go meet with a client, then potential client, then your objective is to figure out if they're a good match and sell them. But then the objective, just like playing a game, if someone introduced you to the game, soccer, right, or what's called football, of course, everywhere else besides America, then you need to know what the objective, what you're trying to do in the game in order to make any sense out of what you're doing. But then when you actually go to play, then you need the objective to make sense out of it. But there's no failure or not. You just see what's the bottleneck to me kicking the ball in the goal, right? And there might be a whole lot of bottlenecks. You might lack endurance. You might lack footwork ability. You might lack a whole number of things in terms of being good at kicking into a goal. But if every time you play, you realize that, of course, you're trying to kick the ball in the goal, but then by playing, what you're doing is you're giving yourself more experience to reveal bottlenecks and other sticking points. So you either get the ball in the goal or you have more of a sense of what the bottleneck is. So now you're motivated to take action consistently, right? Because when you take action, you either find out there isn't a bottleneck, and that's nifty, and you got your objective. And then, but even if you get your objective, you're not like happy forever anyway, right? So what are we trying to get to? Everyone's happy, and there's more increasing good. There's no bad stuff. And that's where we're headed. We're not there now. So why should we try to convince ourselves we obviously aren't there? People instead try to come up with some dumbed down objective like it's the end all be all, and then try to convince themselves they're already at least in the playing field to get there, the island to get there. All they have to do is bash their way through the obstacles, or hope there are no obstacles, or climb over them. Maybe build a few bridges and get there. But that's a totally screwed up way of looking at life. You do that, you're constantly frustrated, scared, upset, approach avoidance. You're scared to look places because there might be an obstacle. You're scared someone will say no. You come across as more desperate, and so forth. You look at things and understand things this way, which is correct. All you have to do to get to what I'm talking about is clear up contradictions for yourself. This isn't even like a perspective. I'm not telling you a way to look at things. I'm not telling you my philosophy. I'm telling you this is right. The only thing between you and looking at things properly regarding all these goals is to clear up, get yourself unstuck towards understanding this, period. It is possible for you to understand how to look at things this way. And if you just clear out all the things that are sticking you on your way, you'll get there. And then you'll just basically see life this way. You'll be motivated to take action. And why will you be motivated? Because you're not going to set goals. If you think you have a problem with motivation, it's because the goal hasn't revealed itself, really. Or you haven't communicated it properly to your mind, which is the only other thing that the results formula basically takes care of that. Or you imagine, I've covered this in other places. I'm not going to rehash it too much right this moment, but I could talk about it in the future again. But you're basically imagining how it would be once you solve the issue that you're trying to solve, get unstuck, get to the objective. And if that feels like you believe that it can happen and that it's appealing, then it got in there with your mind. And then you also then want to have things decluttered so you're not giving your mind other priorities that you don't want it to have. Another big place where you get stuck, practically speaking, here's another piece of immediately practical advice, and this relates to people's question they had for me about creative tension. Okay, here's what I mean by creative tension. Your mind is usefully thought of as a mechanism apart from you. And you don't have to get too deeply into that right now, but just as a thought exercise. Okay, imagine it. Obviously part of your mind or your brain is like a mechanism that works, right? And nonstop and comes up with, makes you feel motivation, makes you feel interested in stuff, is calculating conclusions and decisions. What I mean by creative tension is that your mind as a mechanism apart from you is going to have things that it feels are important. You have limited resources that your mind is allocating resources such as motivation, which then leads to spending money, time, it's processing, emotional effort, whatever. So whatever your mind as a mechanism feels is important, you will feel motivated to do easily. It'll be effortless in a certain way for you if your mind feels like it's the priority. Within the current parameters of how you're defining your current situation, if it's the priority, it'll be easy. It won't necessarily be automatic fast, but it'll be easy in the sense of you're emotionally struggling with your mind, which is really effort, as I've said many times in the past, but this gives another angle on it. Effort is what? It comes from emotion. It comes from internal conflict. It doesn't take effort to move your body. The proof for that is it actually takes effort to hold still. If I told you stay still for the next 4 hours or for the next 3 days, do you think that would take effort? Of course. So I just proved to you, if it takes effort to hold still, then it must not necessarily take effort in the way that we mean it, in the sense that it's like a resource that you're spending that kind of makes you feel exhausted after a while. It obviously doesn't take effort to move, right? So effort is actually just internal conflict. If something within the parameters right now is a priority for your mind in terms of a goal, then there's no effort in pursuing it or putting resources toward it, keeping your mind focused on it, etc. Creative tension is that. It's when your mind has a particular objective as a priority. And what I do is when I want to accomplish something, then I look same thing with the same as always with the unstuck stuff. I try to continually keep conditions away that will make my mind feel like there's another open-ended problem or a competing priority within the current boundaries of the situation that it's in. If there's a real priority that reveals itself, then of course, by logic, I want my mind to have that anyway. So if you say, what if there's something that comes up that's more important? Obviously, then I do actually want my mind to work on the thing that's actually important, right? I just don't want things that I don't think are more important to feel more important to my mind. And that's why starting to have the distinction between you and your mind or reality in your mind, so forth, is important because what's actually important might be different than what your mind is concluding is important. And obviously things could pop up that will make your mind feel like something's important that isn't actually, if you reflect on it, what you wanted to focus on, of course. So by creative tension, I mean that I pay a lot of attention to what's going to actually make my mind feel like something's a priority. And you might say, how do you do that? Start looking, start just paying attention to whatever you feel like doing right now. That's what your mind thinks is a priority. Part of how your mind comes up with priorities is if it feels like it won't make progress on something that otherwise would be a priority. So let's say that in one way, making money is a priority for you. Like you feel like, yeah, that I'd rather do than eating, watching TV, or even like doing something else that might be helpful, like exercising. But that really more than like exercising, I'd rather act and get a client. Let's say, if you were to stop and think about it. But then your mind comes up with other stuff for you to do. The reason what it'll do is if it feels stuck, feels like it won't make progress in its definition of progress, then it will give you other stuff to work on because the mind wants to just climb up the peak. It just wants to make progress. You can harness that by working through the scenarios of walking it through. Just like when I talked about fear, you walk through. Your mind got stuck. If there's a priority that you affirm would be more important, but you don't feel motivated, then it might be clutter, but it also might be that your mind feels like it can or won't make progress. So even if you did try to make money, it wouldn't really lead anywhere. And your mind is coming up with that based on association, which is not a good epistemological technique. It's not a good way to figure out what's actually correct. You can overcome your mind's incorrect getting stuck by walking through this situation in your mind. And also, I'm giving you a deeper context to look at things where you won't feel stuck. Because if your mind feels like progress means I get results, progress means the person says yes to being my client, and then you go and you try to get people to say yes and they don't. Now you're going to not feel, your mind in many cases won't feel motivated because it sees progress as the final result, as the behavior, the surface thing. So your mind works. It's very simple. It's overly simplistic and it's wrong. It's just basically stupid in a sense. I'm not being insulting. I'm just like to not look at something more deeply and correctly and just to look at what's on the surface is silly. But that's what your mind will often do. So when it equates progress with a surface result, right? Just like people I work with think that progress involves making more money the next month or even year by year, then that's a surface, shallow way of thinking. It might happen to be correct, but it might happen not to be. So it's shallow, right? Sometimes someone's behavior is similar to how they really feel, the overall thing that you want them to do, but sometimes their behavior can be different, right? So focusing on what they say or what they do in the moment, they're just on the surface, unhelpful. Focusing on the currents around them is much more helpful. I'm saying a lot of different things here. They're related, but let me get back to my main recent thread here. So surface, getting clients, if you feel not motivated because you didn't get the result a few times in a row, your mind associates, I can't make progress that way. I'm giving you an overall context where your mind doesn't fall into that. What you want to do is you don't need to fight against how your mind works. You need to understand how your mind works. See, your mind on its own functions really if it's given the right playing field or island. It's good at lighting over obstacles, smashing through them, or maybe building a bridge over. Basically going around or through an obstacle, your mind is naturally going to be good at all by itself. What it's not good at is realizing it's on the wrong island. So it wants to believe, so because it's not good at it, by default, can be excellent, but your mind by its default functioning without you interfering properly, your mind isn't good at it. So it's a circular thing. It wants to believe all the time, convince itself that it's on the right island. The most tremendous and tremendously counterproductive example of this is mostly what motivates people is convincing themselves that they're already good, competent, nifty people. People mostly do almost everything, including when they think they're trying to make money. They're mostly just trying to make themselves feel good about themselves. And I just started to explain to you why. Is because the mind, because it's good at dealing with stuff once it's already on the right island, it wants to believe it's already on the right island by default. You can change all this, expand all this. But so one of the main island that you're on is your own self-image. And so most everything that people do is to reinforce their own self-image, which is incredible drag. It makes you less attractive. It's so attractive to fundamentally look at things differently, where it's not about your self-image, right? I'm basically not doing this to increase my opinion of myself. People, of course, have to also convince themselves they're not doing things to reinforce their self-image while they're doing them. But if you look for it, it's pretty much all people do is they do stuff to reinforce their self-image. And we know this intuitively because we know not to do stuff that undermines someone's self-image, including correcting them in most cases. You need to create a whole artificial construct like a corporation or something just to correct people. It's very difficult. And why is it devastating? Because the mind feels devastated if it's not on the right island because by default, it doesn't know what to do. Can't do it. Its algorithm can only climb the mountain. If you tell it it's on the wrong mountain, I'm screwed. I won't go down. I can't go up. I'm screwed. Another example it's the same example, but another angle on the same example is how people feel like, oh my gosh, I don't want to go and meet with a potential client because then if they say no, that'll undermine my confidence. I need to feel confident in order to make sales. Of course you don't. Of course, you're all trapped on the wrong island if you're thinking that entire way. So I realized this when I was trying to figure out how the heck to get you out of it completely. And you can't get out of it by being on it and just repeating to yourself that you're not on the island. The unuseful aspect of positive thinking. People think that it's like negative. I've been told in a million ways that I'm being negative whenever I tell people they're on the island. It's why I'm basically unemployable because my main strength is realizing that. And that's not what people want to hear. But people don't want to pay someone to tell them that they're just fundamentally wrong. So badly wrong that they can go through a whole bunch of different directions. So, like, as an extreme example, no one wants to be told maybe you're a fundamentally incompetent person right now that has fundamentally your ideas. I hope you guys didn't lose sound now. I think you guys have sound, right? Just that's from a while ago, 21 minutes ago. Okay. Anyway, obviously people have the sound because they were responding. But it's so pervasive. But once you understand, so you can't get off of that island of reinforcing a self-image until in order to let go of things like that, you need to figure out what's good about it. I talk about the berries, right? The berry example. If you're in a forest and you're eating berries and there's red berries and you need to eat them to survive, you can't, if half of them are bad for you and half of them are necessary for you to eat, then you can't just stop eating berries. Similarly, you can't just let go of making your whole life about reinforcing self-image unless you figure out what you need about that, what it's doing for you. You can't just let go of it, literally. It's something you have to figure out. You have to understand your way out of it. What people want to do is just declare their way out of it. Oh, I don't care what people think. Oh, no, I'm not doing this for my own benefit or to feel good about myself. Of course you are, because you need to until and unless your mind needs it, until and unless you realize what it's getting from it, why it's doing it. You need to understand why it's doing it. So then you can show it how to get that without the rest of the crap of just living your life to reinforce your own self-image. See if I can tie some of these threads down for now. So if you're not motivated for getting a client because you've had some no's and you feel like it's undermining your confidence or your mind feels like it's not making progress, then I've given you something you can work through with your mind to help see things fundamentally differently. And either immediately or over time, that will get worked into your mind's framework of things. And you take action. You don't do things. It's not about failing or not. Of course, you cannot hit an objective yet, but you understand that we already know we haven't hit the objective of the world being perfect in the sense of no more bad and everyone, and there's ever increasing good that we can create. So we haven't hit that. So we know we're already stuck. So finding out bottlenecks is wonderful, right? Like this idea that like you're hoping that there's no bottlenecks is nonsense because of course there's bottlenecks or else there'll be no bad, right? So you already know that you're stuck. And so once you see it that way, you embrace it, you accept it, and then you live to find things that are sticking points and wrong assumptions in your own mind and all that stuff, right? If you know you're in a prison, you're excited about finding a way out. If you're trying to convince yourself you're not in a prison, then you're screwed while you're in prison, right? Oh yeah, I'm glad exactly. The results formula is awesome because it helps communicate, helps get your mind start clear on the priority of what you want it to be. And it basically gets your mind unstuck and clear toward a goal that's ideally revealed itself from. But so if you look at going to talk to a potential client as well, either they're going to sign on as my client or I'm going to get more sense of what the bottleneck might be, right? And then that's how you go through life. And you might theoretically think, oh, did that really work that way? And so forth. It does. I just live my life this way and it's terrific. It's real simple. And then the objectives change. Like the objective of getting a person to become my client is no longer at least a priority once they say no. It might still be there, like ultimately if they say yes later, but it's not my thing that I'm focused on anymore. It's not the priority thing. There's going to be generally one thing that's a priority within the parameters of what's going on at any one time. There can't be multiple priorities. Don't make any sense. So it's one priority. And another way to think of it in terms of even goals or objectives is not what goals you have, but what the only one and only one priority is in any one situation or within any one parameter or within definition or boundaries at any one time. So it's just when you think of it in terms of just a matter of what the priority is, and then that logically reveals itself. I don't mean it reveals itself like assuming that it reveals itself by coming to you from your mind, so to speak. That is making the very terrible assumption that everyone makes all the time, which is ignoring epistemology, assuming that when you feel clear and certain on something, that it's actually true. So when I say a goal reveals itself, I don't mean that what your mind is telling you is the goal that reveals itself is correct. It might not be. Just because you feel certain does not mean that you're right. Just because your mind is making you feel certain does not mean that conclusion is correct. That is the fundamental bottleneck or issue that you have in life, what I just said. That fake certainty, that fabricated certainty, or equating the feeling of certainty with actual correctness. So I do not ignore that. As a matter of fact, I treat that as ultimately the fundamentally most important thing you can deal with in life. However, as you get your epistemology right, then goals reveal themselves correctly or incorrectly. But not the goal, but the priority. You can even forget about the word goal to some degree. And this isn't about what word you use, but it's never about being like the word police. But if something's in the past or if a client's already said no, I don't mean no in a way that you can still sell them during that session. Of course, with good sales techniques, someone might say, and then you loop around like Jordan Belfort teaches. And so, of course, if that's the case, you can still be going, it can still be a priority in terms of getting them to a yes. But the point where it's no longer helpful, and he also talked about this, is there's a point where there's not going to be a sale and you need to get a sense of that. And good. And so that's another sticking point, place where you can be stuck, is if you're unable to recognize the difference between, it's like epistemology for sale, which has to do with knowing what's true. So one thing that you'll get better and better at is distinguishing when it's no longer useful to continue trying to make the sale. That's a terrifically useful thing because you can give up too early or too late. Or you might be right, you might be at the sale and the people talk themselves out of the sale. So getting a sense of when you're unblocked and you can just go in. But this basic idea of trying to see what the bottleneck is, you'll naturally sell so well because you're constantly doing the ABCs of closing, which ABC stands for always be closing, right? It's an acronym. So in life though, you can always be closing. I constantly just try to get what I'm trying to get directly. I don't have, what is it called? Like analysis paralysis or something like that. I don't mean that I'm perfect. I just mean that with this method is just so awesome that by doing it and the more I understand it, it's just so effective. Right. So I'm not talking about, oh, I'm great. Again, it's not about that when you embrace the fact that you It's not about whether you're great, and it's about method. Then you can understand the right method, and then success happens. And then when you tell people, it might sound like bragging to them because to them, life is about convincing themselves that they're already right. They figure you're doing the same thing. Anyhow, the always be closing thing. See, you constantly can try to head straight for what you want because that's often a great way to see if there's a bottleneck, is just to try to get it, right? But then you understand that there's typically a bottleneck. And Jordan Belfort, the Wolf of Wall Street guy, who really understands sales so well, and his course is great, and his talk is in the Ride of the Wave event. The recording, come with it, members area, it's right there right now. But it's so good. But he sees things. He applies my overall meta strategy. He figured it out just for sales, right? He didn't realize he could apply this overall thing to his life. There's no other people don't either. So when you have this understanding of meta strategy, you're constantly learning about success overall, meta success, while learning about figuring out the right specific tactic to use. And you do both, and they reinforce each other. That's how I go through life too. But it applies to sales because you go after it. There's typically a bottleneck. So if he expects people to not buy at first, when he first tries to make the sale, it's unlikely and unusual the person will just say yes. But by going for the sale early and often, and when you do that, you also learn how to go after stuff without sticking your neck out to get chopped up, right? You learn to do it in a way that's like where you don't blow out the rest of the sale or the sales process by going after the sale early, right? But so he'll go after the sale, like he'll put out something say something like, based on what I've shown you so far, how does it look to you, or some form of that, or he can give you the exact words, but some form of that. And then if they say looks good, then you're like, okay, here's where you sign, right? Instead of talk more and talk yourself out of the sale. But typically the person will have and haw a little bit. And then he has a way of poking around. And because he's done this, he has a checklist of what the likely bottlenecks are, right? Just like you will if you apply this to sales, and just like you will meta for your life, there's certain types of bottlenecks or sticking points that come up in your life regularly, like the creative tension thing. Things accidentally having conditions coming up in your life that make your mind think the wrong thing is a priority is a very common thing that makes inefficiency in people's lives. That's what I mean by tension. It is getting creative tension. So then you learn that happens, and you learn to constantly be vigilant about it. So your mind has the priority that is adaptive or beneficial or what you want pretty consistently. I pay attention to it, so I get it. So my mind consistently, I don't mean always, but quite consistently, has the priority that's adaptive for me, that it feels is important. And so my resources get poured into things that I want them to be consistently. And then lo and behold, I get all kinds of great stuff all the time. And I don't feel emotional conflict. And yeah. And then with sales, again, meta and the specific tactic, it's all a reflection of itself. It's like a hologram. You will develop a sense of what the common objections are or bottleneck. It's not always an objection like I object to such a, right? Like they hem and haw, and they'll say one thing, but that won't be the real issue. Just like you'll feel, oh, the problem in my relationship is this person keeps not doing what I want in some way. But that might not be the real issue, right? There might be a different issue. So you learn what the real issue is, and you learn what the signal is or what they say. Oh, I have to go talk to my business partner or spouse about this. What they're going to do is just a delaying tactic, or it means they're not convinced, right? That means you're basically not making a sale. And so you don't just pay attention to this, what it looks like on the surface. You learn what it really means, and you learn that they need to have more certainty. And then you figure out ways to get the certainty with your particular niche, right, with the thing that you're doing. But so you fundamentally approach life in this way. You approach sales, and whether or not you're doing sales, you can still illustrate my meta concept that applies to everything in life. You go after what you want, you take action, and it can be imperfect action, but you don't stick your neck out to get chopped off. You don't do things that are a risk of losing your whole pot, right? Deadfall, right? You don't take that kind of risk. You don't need to. You poke when you're poking something that you can lose, right? You poke with a stick, and if something bites the stick off, you poke into a hole. If it's the wrong hole and the lion or bear chomps on the stick, you just lose the stick. You don't lose your hand. You didn't stick your neck in there, your whole head in there. So you poke, right? You're not risking everything when you go and you meet with a client. You poke around. However, if your self-image is constantly at stake, then you constantly are sticking your neck out to be chopped off because it's so important to you. when it shouldn't be. But it will be unless you, again, understand how to look at things fundamentally differently. You don't need the whole self-image thing. And I've dealt with this a lot in the past, and but now with my understanding that I have now, I'll continue with it in the future. But so much feels like fundamentally threatening and scary to people when their self-image is constantly the same, right? If you're going to get your self-image chopped off or injured, then it's a real risk to talk to clients. It's scary. They might say no, and they might really make you feel like you got hurt for real. But when you look at life totally differently and correctly, it's not just a different perspective. This is the right perspective, regardless of how good a job I do explaining it. I'll get there over time. It's not like something I'm just telling you is like a thing that's optional. The fundamental thing about what I'm talking about is that it's right. So however long it takes us to get there, you need to get there because it's correct. But I'm getting there the usual way. I poke around and we try to see where the sticking points are, where you get confused or where I'll get feedback from you guys and see, based on what you're saying, where the miscommunication is or what. Or maybe there's not, right? Maybe the sale is made, so to speak, but I don't expect that. But do you see how my objective is, of course, for you to understand everything I'm talking about, everything that I figured out about this whole topic. But does that mean that I'm like hoping to succeed right now and that it's a failure if I don't, and that my self-image is a stake and oh my gosh, I hope that they applaud me and say, oh yeah, I got it. But that's normally what happens, right? When people are teaching something is some version of what I just said. Oh, I'm hoping they'll get it. I'm not hoping you'll get it in that sense. I know you'll get it if we stick with it with each other. If you stick with me and I stick with you, and I'll stick around and we'll keep talking about this. And I have a good understanding of it. We're on a playing field where we can succeed. And by poking around, we'll see what the bottlenecks are and we'll work on it. You see how easy? But then there's no such thing as failure, not because I don't believe in failure, but because it actually is an inherent contradiction. It's an act. The idea of failure is you have to create the wrong conditions for it to even be possible. Just like I talk about not asking someone questions that have a right answer and a wrong answer, like morally, did you brush your teeth or do you want to buy this thing? Do you want to be my client or whatever? If you're hoping for one rather than the other, you want to be able to ask if they want to say yes, if they want to buy without there being a right or wrong answer. Because you're really asking, are you certain yet? Just like if I were to ask one of you individually, if you were sitting right here or whatever, do you understand what I've said so far? There's a way that I can ask it where there's not a right or wrong answer. I just need to poke. When you poke, there's nothing right or wrong. You have an objective. Maybe you're poking around a cave to find a good cave to sleep in. Take a very plain illustration, right? So there's an objective, but there's not a right or wrong answer. And you don't like hope to hit your objective. It's just an objective. It's not about whether you hope to hit it. Like, of course, it's your objective. Of course, that's what you're going for. And of course, the right way to go about it is you poke, see what the sticky points are. It's possible to find it, and then you find it once you get through all the sticking points, and obstacles, and you build bridges and so, right? And that's just fundamentally how you live your life. And then there isn't this fear. There's not this, because fear is all related to being stuck. Boredom is related to being stuck. Frustration, anger, every negative emotion, which are basically not just unpleasant, but they're indicative of being counterproductive. People think that negative emotions are necessary. And then ironically, people think that it's negative when I say, you're on the wrong island, or we need to climb down here and go up here. It seems like I'm being negative, or I'm just obviously wrong, or I'm doing it. But that's not negative. But negative emotions are actually counterproductive. Or they're not, but it's not counterproductive to feel the emotion. The emotion, it's a signal that here's what I'm saying. The negative emotion is not counterproductive. That quote taken in a vacuum would be incorrect, or you'd interpret it or whatever wrong. Not you'd interpret it wrong, but be misinterpreted compared to what I'm trying to communicate. Negative emotions are a sign that there's an error in your overall planning, in your overall thinking and framework, period. And so when you're not in a big rush for survival, when you're not in fight or flight mode, lizard brain mode, fight, flight, reproduction, right? Feeding, the 4Fs, then you want to figure out what the problem was that led to the emotion. And the problem is not the surface stupidity of, oh, that guy didn't do what I wanted. Okay. Now that's why I give you the boundary of property rights. If someone is violating property rights, it's a different sort of thing. And the negative emotion comes from a robbing of meaning. Without property, there isn't meaning. You literally can't express love if you don't have any property. You literally can't give to charity. If there was 100% tax rate, they took all your money and gave it to the poor, so to speak. You could not, that would totally rob you of the meaning of work, the ability to love, and that in the sense of giving to charity. You see what I'm saying? Just as an illustration. But you still, it's not that you need to feel angry. You can understand what's wrong, but you'd at least, you would want the person to stop doing what they're doing. Outside of a property rights violation, you don't need to have any negative emotions ever. Inside of property rights violations, it's just a separate issue that again can be dealt with in however, but at least if we can put that in one thing outside of a clear violation that's big and major, then you definitely, a negative emotion, you should have it. If there's a contradiction, it's going to naturally lead to a negative emotion. But what you want, it's not that you shouldn't feel the negative emotion, it's that you want to find the contradiction. You get my point, right? Just trying to deny negative emotion, people say bottled up and so forth. That isn't helpful because the contradiction's still there spewing out the problem, right? It's like you want to feel pain in a lot of cases, not after you get the signal, but while you need the signal, right? If your hand on a pot oven, to use an obvious cliche example, you want to feel pain. So you realize that your hand doesn't like burn and melt. The problem isn't that your hand hurts. The problem is that your hand. So the problem isn't that you feel bored or frustrated or angry, but the problem is that you have an overall context to your goal, your understanding of goals. And notice how many contradictions I pointed out, that they all relate, right? This idea of like arbitrarily setting them, relating to reinforcing your self-image. It's just thing after thing that like reinforces itself. It's this whole worldview that's incorrect. It's not just an alternative worldview. It's literally incorrect. It's full of contradictions. Today, I wanted to do two things. I wanted to go straight after telling you a whole bunch of stuff directly, while simultaneously, this will help give us a sense where the bottlenecks are. So then I can go through in a more structured way, perhaps. And maybe they'll never will. Maybe this is the structure. This is the fundamental way to do things anyway. You got to poke around, see where the bottlenecks are, and keep going. But as you see, my presentation style is actually based on the same kind of sense. Okay. Excellent. Where will the replay be posted? In the director's cut section, I'll make a new place under my name. And I will post the replay this time. Okay, great. Our sound is great. Always be closing. Okay, super great, Jennifer. All right, I'm going to take we've already gone 2 hours, but I'll still do a little bit of discussion. I'm going to take a break for just a minute or so, and then I'll come back for some little discussion. And then we'll continue in the future. Okay, I am back. And here's how it'll probably work is that we'll probably have less discussion in the earlier webinars because I'll be giving you background, giving you stuff, and I have a lot more to share, of course. And then we'll probably do more discussion towards maybe the second month. And you're very welcome, Jennifer, who writes, thank you, David Mills. I appreciate each of your sessions so much, and they're making a difference, untangling my mind and improving daily life. Yeah, and I really made a lot of progress. Stuff is really getting unified and clarified in my mind of how this all works. So I'm excited for all the sessions, but the next whatever number of sessions when I'm doing the original dump of stuff. And then the feedback will be less relevant right now because I'm not quite done, but still. So how do I know if my mind is on the wrong island? One of the things you do, and that's a good question I even had in my mind as I was working on this over weeks and months, and like the question of, it's not necessarily always obvious, like for example, or even what the wrong island is. It's easy when I just use the metaphor of an island, but let's suppose you're in a relationship, including it could be a business relationship, and something isn't working. Well, what's the wrong island? Is the wrong island that you need to stop working with that person or having them as a client or a relationship partner? Or is it some assumption that you're making about life? Is it some issue, childhood that you haven't resolved? And we all have that. To imagine we don't, right? Mostly people's personality are built on the foundation of infants, right? And they're just like with some like tweaks rather than any kind of fundamental changes. They're just glommed on top of the foundation when they're a child. It's hard to know exactly what the wrong island is, but at least what we'll do is you'll get better, and I'll be working with you on this, but we'll get better, and we're really going to delve into like the nature of being stuck, right? And the different ways we get stuck, the different ways to kind of look at it, examples and so forth. One thing, for example, with a relationship is you could try stepping away from the relationship temporarily. That's not always feasible, but then if you still have or you can just think back on your past. If you have the same problem come up with other relationship partners, then the problem is something other than probably than your particular issue with that person. right? On the other hand, it could be that the problem is that there's a rare match that you're looking for, such as with a romantic relationship, only maybe one out of 100,000 people might be really right for you and you right for them. Like really. And I'm not saying that's the number, but I'm just saying for the sake of a mental exercise. Then the issue might be that you haven't found that person. Right? But if it's something where the base rate of success is can be supposed to be fairly frequent, such as with client relationship or just business relationships or friendships, right? With then if you look back and if you have that problem recurring for yourself with other people, then it's probably not the person. Or you can try to step away from the relationship temporarily, like I said, and see if that gives you some perspective. Or maybe there's a problem in your life. Maybe you don't feel motivated to work very well and you think of the problem as your relationship partner. Then you could try stepping away from your relationship partner temporarily, if that's feasible. But this also just gives, I'm talking about the specific example or tactic, but I'm also just giving you a sense overall of how to look at it. And then see if your motivation comes back, if it's there or not. If it's not there, it's the scientific method. Okay, what I'm talking about. You remove various variables and see how things look. Right? And that's an indication. But you can also look, there's a whole logical process or theoretical process you can do also. I think it gives me a good avenue to explore with you guys on a webinar in the future. There's a technique I use where I'm able to build threads logically in my head and I don't have to like step away from like major things in my life so much as I think about what major words mean. Like if I say a sentence like I'm not motivated, then I try to take a look at what's the nature of motivation. What are the factors also what are the reasons that go into motivation? And then when you can understand that theoretically, and then when you understand the factors that go into motivation, it can give you insight into whether it's a person or whether it's just a behavior or a thing that's going on with a person that you can remove that circumstance with the person, like getting an office, for example, rather than just working in the main living room of your house, let's say. Then you don't need to like get rid of your partner. You can just get a separate space to work in. And you can guess to do that by looking at the nature of motivation and what does that in creative tension and so forth. I think I had some other thought there. Relationship part. It's you, if it's the other person, if the base rate. Oh, there's an interesting thing with friends that I didn't realize until like in my low 20s, I think, was that for me to be friends with someone, I mentioned this in passing times, but they really, it's not that I choose this to be the case. I'm not saying it's automatically the case, like totally 100%, but within a shocking amount of percentage truthfulness. If someone's not like a gamer, like a game playing type person who's interested in like strategy games and so forth, then I'm generally not going to have like click with them very well. Like we might say hi to each other. We might have a nice time talking, be friends in a context that we're both in general, or even in the business, we can be friendly and we can call ourselves friends, but we don't have an easy friendship where it's like easy for us to talk outside of that limited context where we really want to hang out very much or have much to talk about if we were. Doing business together turns people into gamers in a sense because it's almost like the strategy game to do a business, especially at least the way I do it. But anyway, but discovering that was massive practical effect. So in that case, the base rate, there's a lot of potential people I could be friends with, but they're all of a certain category. And if I didn't know to look for that category, then I might have person after person that think there's a problem with me. And I think, and then I've also mentioned that I was able to point this out to my wife and it helped her because then people wonder if there's something wrong with them. But for her, if someone's kind of like international or like someone that's not in their country of their origin, or if they're just simply Russian, like she is, then she can relate to them. But relating to an American woman who's born in America, just like a normal American woman, is very difficult for her. And she doesn't really become friends with them. She doesn't dislike or have problems with them, but there's just not a natural, she just never feels like she knows what they're thinking or feels like she has like a friendship connection that's like the kind of thing where you can go and make appointment to hang out or have your kids play, if the kids are friends. But that sort of extra connection that makes friendship kind of natural and easy. And then you wonder if it's you. But that's the kind of thing that once you learn to look at life in terms of what gets people stuck, and you start discovering all these types of things to look for, like, and you'll have much more of a repertoire. If this isn't something you've been really focused on intentionally and adding to your toolbox about, then again, it's helpful to look at yourself like an amateur, where if you're new to something and you ask someone who's an expert at it, what do I do to become an expert? It isn't just I can tell you a little like quickly how to do it. You accumulate the knowledge by focusing on it and by making it kind of an avenue of inquiry for yourself. But this whole idea of learning about being stuck and the things that lead to it and how to spot it and how to deal with it, it's a fundamental meta strategy that everyone needs, right? It's the success mechanism. So it'll be interesting to everyone's mind. The only thing would be like clutter in the way of it being interesting. But it's interesting to everyone in the sense that it's important to everyone and helpful to everyone. And therefore it would be interesting to every person's mind once once the blocks are removed and so forth. And the clarity is bridged to your mind. So I haven't fully answered your question, but we'll accumulate that as we continue, Shema. Like in essence, this whole crushing the game is in one angle of looking at it. It's about what you just asked, Shema. So great question. And that way too. Johnny Liu, great David Mills. You understand negative emotions and why they're there for us. It's the prolonged harboring that hurts us unless we cut them off sooner rather than later. It doesn't mean repressing or suppressing. Right. Ultimately, you need to figure out what causes. And I've talked about this before. There's just simply a recipe for boredom, frustration, and fear. And it all relates to different ways of your mind thinking it's stuck and that you're stuck. And it's a fundamental way of looking at the whole thing about goals, right? And as you come to see the framework that I discovered that's correct about the whole thing, then you'll generally start creating those recipes for all these negative emotions back. The other ways of getting rid of negative emotions, basically, unless someone's discovered what I've discovered and what I'm sharing with you, you're just going to walk into negative emotions. Like so therapists and other people that they can help you create conditions to protect yourself, like in a kind of restrictive way, but it's not going to be like fun, like pervasively successful, like it should be as we continue together. And that I've already might have helped you in my previous stuff, but I'm way advanced past what I knew even when I did alchemy. Should help. People seldomly look too closely at their lives, which is exactly what you said. The mind brain hates exactly, and you can undo that whole thing where you unblock one thing that'll unblock the next thing and so forth. But you'll get to where it'll be great to discover issues with your own mind and contradictions. And you might already be pretty close to them. But one of the first blocks is to get over the certainty thing and then the self-image thing. And I think I'll be able to explain that pretty directly. I gave a number of indications about it, but I'll probably by next webinar, I'll be addressing that further and more. It's a great illustration of red flag to stop and dig into properly and directly. And remember the digging, when people dig, what they'll do is they'll make the same mistake that island mistake of they'll be like, oh, I want to figure out why I'm angry and get rid of it. But then they'll conclude that it's basically one of the things that the mind can deal with default. Like if this person's the enemy or this person's doing the wrong thing or I'm doing the wrong thing, or it ends up turning it, the mind tries to turn everything into an obstacle that it can go around or get over or a person that's the problem. Like it likes to identify a thing that's like on the island that it can see that's the problem. So it can bash it or go around it or ignore it or whatever. But that's very often, sometimes it's right, but often it's wrong. And so again, very often then like the negative emotions will constantly come out unless people discover this deeply incorrect way of looking at the world and how goals and mind work and all that. That's so nice. So welcome. Thank you, Susan. So much insight. And we're not done. Again, it's really fit together for me. I really have an advanced understanding at this point of what I'm talking about. Jose says, love it, David. Many takeaways. Thank you. Yeah, this is probably one where you're going to want to read for sure. It's probably going to be like a new webinar for the next 2 or 3 or 4 times that you listen to it. Because also the nature of the structure of how I do things. And of course, if I somehow, which I don't, and there's not really a great way to do such, but if I knew like the exact slides to make and the exact words to say that were exactly structured, then I would. But there's no such thing in that I'm aware of. Here's how to put it. I'm always closing in the sense of I'm always looking to find a structure that will be like the perfect way to explain stuff to you. But then I haven't really found it. I haven't made that sale. And I think the way that I'll get there is to do a whole series where the ideas are right and we get there with each other by looking at it and me talking like this. And then I think I'll look back on the series, listen to it finally. I don't really re-listen to my stuff up and yet, but I think this might even be the time. We'll find out. Again, it'll reveal itself. I'm not hoping one way or the other. I know, but my objective is to do a webinar series where I feel like, there you go. It's all in there now, or enough that it's like the great foothold for a series that I can digest, and I'll re-listen to it and structure it and organize it. And that's how I'll get there. But I have to do it like this whole thing first. And this might be the time. And we'll find out by going after it. Right? You see how easy? Let's do it for 4 hours. Thanks, Luke. You're awesome. You're awesome. Nicholas said, wow, great webinar. David, how does a goal hit you if you don't choose it? Shockingly easy. For example, you feel hungry and you want to eat, right? And that costs money. I'm not being sarcastic. I'm being simple, but not sarcastic. And so you need at least the money to buy that burger, or you can go to the soup kitchen and not need money, right? But then other things might come up and you'll want money for it. And then you can start doing math and think, all right, how much money do I need, let's say, for the next 6 months? And then say, then what's going to happen in 6 months? Maybe I have enough money for the next 6 months. I just want to do philosophy for 6 months or for 3 months, and then maybe have a plan at that, and then work on a plan for making some more money. Or maybe I don't want to leave that to chance because I don't know for sure I know a way to make money after I run out of money in 6 months. And so I want to get that straight first. Maybe I don't even have to earn the money, but at least I have a clear clarity of how I'll do it. And then I work on philosophy. Or maybe I want to make enough money to take care of having a baseline amount of money for the rest of my life. I'll do that. But that's all that's how you reveal how much money you need. And then you might, after you figure out the total amount, then you might break it down into monthly. Or you might say, look, I don't know the total amount. That can reveal itself differently. I don't really know what it takes me to be comfortable and how it works. If you don't know about annuities, then that's an issue, but I just told you. Annuities are part of my plan for taking care of money, so I'm not, at least have a baseline of not being desperate or needing to do. But maybe that's the thing that's kind of mysterious. But you're like, look, I'll tell you what, if I can make 10,000 a month, then wait a second. If I can make 5,000 a month doing some SEO stuff, then if I can make 10, I can make 5. So let's just go for 5. I'll do it monthly. And then I'll do it monthly for a little while, and that'll give me a sense of if I like it. And maybe I'll like it and it'll be sustainable, and I won't have to worry about a total amount because I'll be cool doing what I'm doing. I'll make sure that I have enough of a buffer that I'd save for at least, say, 6 months or a year so I can adjust to things that come up that kind of jack with my income. And so then the monthly works. Right? You reveal it by starting with monthly, and then I'll see how that works. Any of those are valid. What are you doing? You're always closing, so to speak, metaphorically. You poke around in a valid, reasonable way, and then you find like a reasonable thing to stipulate and you go for it. And you'll find when you approach it that way, you'll naturally feel motivated. And the only thing that would interfere with your motivation at that point would be clutter from your life, things coming up that feel important when you'd rather they didn't feel important. Again, if something feels important because it is important, because it came up, then of course by logic, it is important, more important. It is the priority, and then you deal with that priority, and then you go back to the other thing, like making money. If something comes up that's urgent during that day that you have to deal with, that really is more important than focusing on making money that day, then deal with a more urgent thing for real. And then, but what'll happen is things will come up that'll seem important, or you might not even affirm intellectually that they seem important, but if your mind is thinking about it, oh, what I do is I pay attention to what my mind actually allocating resources to, or making me feel like allocating resources to. So if my mind's wandering, or I feel like going to eat or going to do something when it shouldn't be a priority because I'm well fed already and so forth, then something's going on with the creative tension. Right? My mind isn't treating as a priority what I want it to. And so either it's not connected up, like it's not bridged, or where it has clarity on the benefit of why this is a priority, why other things aren't, or it's getting cluttered. It's one of those. And again, I know that because I think about things that get things stuck, right? And which you will too, and you'll just accumulate that. It'll be at your fingertips. If you haven't been thinking about being stuck, then it might look like that stuff might not leap right to mind at first. But then either by hearing it from me or just by discovering it for yourself and some combination thereof, then it'll be more at your fingertips. And what seems like it might be hard to think about being unstuck now, it'll become easier and easier. And again, it's really fundamentally the meta strategy in life is just understanding how to not be stuck in all the various ways that you're stuck. And I proved it to you. I literally showed you how to know it for real. Because that original exercise, if you knew for sure that you were going to get to everything being super wonderful and you weren't going to be stuck, how'd you feel? Great. So there you go. You might say, David, okay, so what if I figure out how not to be stuck, but the world can't be perfect? Let me ask you this. Can the world be better than at least how it would be if you made all bad decisions? Right? Or how about the decisions that you would naturally make if you don't improve? If you don't improve your ideas at all from now to eternity, if you never improve, you just reinforce your self-image now, but you're stuck where you are now with your level of understanding. Can the world be better than if you stayed stuck at your current level of dopeness, your current level of competence, rightness, goodness, right? If it could be better than how it would be if you just stayed static with your level of understanding, then you don't need to know whether it's going to be perfect or not. It could be better if you understand better. And so you just keep getting unstuck on the way to whatever better is. And if you did the best job you could at unsticking things, then however good life could be, the world could be at that point, then that's what you can hit. So you get to the same place no matter how you look at it. Is if you focus on being unstuck on the way to goodness, then you'll maximize goodness, whatever that might look like. And it's better, probably far better, right? Pretty obviously far better. I can tell you it is. But it's hard to get into every proof. It takes more background. But think you get to the same place no matter what. You just work on being unstuck. And what I'll continue to illustrate to you too is not just, so you can't see something by just looking at it. You see something by looking at the difference. So we also need to see why the default is that why people don't look at it this way. And how it looks to not look at the world by being unstuck. See, people don't look at really in terms of being unstuck. They want progress. They want growth. They want behaviors from people. Those are all the same thing. Results, progress, growth, behaviors. People are always concluding that's what they want, whether or not they realize it. And it's false. It's true that they want it because they're wrong and they want it, or that they have this fundamental contradiction. But you don't need progress or growth. You don't need it because when you go for that, you end up with a fake thing. There's a way to understand progress that, yeah, you do want it. But what people end up with is wanting the appearance of progress. Right? They want the client to say yes. Sure, that's the objective in one sense, but you don't need the appearance of it. You want to have something be unstuck. If a client says yes, but you didn't unstuck anything, to me, that's not progress. To me, that's something to be grateful for. If I go, I don't do SEO client consulting, but if I did, right? If something metaphorical to me, someone buys OMG. So when I go for the close, when I go for the result and I get it, then I'm grateful. Okay. But that's weirdly different. That's not progress. And I'm glad you said it. So I realized too, is you said, oh, how does it go? Hey, yeah, I'm what you said it, but I talked myself to this. Again, there's so many things I want to get to that I have to just talk and get to things. But this might be fascinating. Fascinating to me even to think of it and say it. You can tell I like figuring this stuff out. But I literally, this is amazing. But so people see it as progress when someone behaves the way they want. A girl has sex with them. A girl does whatever. Obviously, assuming a heterosexual guy, just as an example. Or a client says yes, or they make money, or they make a sale. I didn't even realize to explain this until just now. I don't see that as progress. I see it as something to be grateful for, which is actually two separate things. So I get all the benefit of it. Plus I get the benefit of the sale, which is like, gives me a building block, money, and person that's getting my product, right? Getting a client in and of itself is helpful. And I'm grateful, but I literally don't see this progress. Think of the local peaks that I've described before. Like you're on the mountain range and you can't see the different peaks, but you just see the one you're on. And there might be others that might not be. And you're climbing up when I'm climbing up the one that I'm climbing, I don't see that as progress because I might have to climb down anyway. You're climbing if it's the peak that you want to be on. So I don't see the climbing as progress. I see the whole process as progress in the sense of, I see the progress in the sense that it'll help me to see where to be unstuck. And I know I'm going to inevitably succeed. But when I make the sale, so to speak, if I take a step up the hill and it takes me up the hill, I don't see that as progress. I'm like, oh, that's cool. That's fun. Right. Nifty. And I enjoy it. and actually enjoy it more because I could just fully be grateful and enjoy it. But you don't even know if it's going to take you forward. If a client says yes, that could be a pain in the ass and not even pay you, right? A person could buy and I like every sale, but then once in a while there could be a problem with that person, right? It's extremely rare, right? But that they can get charged back or something, right? It might even just be purely a negative event, but you don't know. But I'm grateful and enjoy it. And then, but literally, that's not progress. To me, literally, progress, if someone does what I wanted them to do, so to speak, with the objective, I don't see that as progress at all. I see understanding things that change the currents, things that change the influence on them, or me understanding them better as progress. But it all has to do with understanding better what unsticks things or unimpedes things or what gets something, but the default going in the direction that I want. And so that's progress. Understand, this is what I meant by understanding when I said the understanding line, or I seek understanding. Literally, that's it. That's how I measure progress, period. I don't measure progress by the sale at all. People report to me stuff as if it's progress, and I'll be happy for them or whatever, but I have this feeling of wrongness too, because they see it as progress, and it's not. And it's not that I don't want them to see it as progress, it's that it's part of the whole way of looking at life that just sucks. They're going to have failure and negative emotions and so much less success than they can have. What I'm describing to you now is like the holy grail. You look at things that way. And I just didn't realize until it's meant to point out that no, I don't see it making the sales progress. And basically everyone else does. They see behaviors and results and things like that as progress. And I literally only see things that help me understand about the default currents and things that help support that and involving being unstuck as progress. And that's the only thing I see as progress. And it literally is the only thing that's progress. And so it all matches up properly. So what feels like progress is progress. And then that super makes life easy. And it gets easier and easier because you make actual progress. And it's just incredibly great. So that's nice. Okay. Wonderful stuff. I think I'll draw it to a close right now. You're very welcome, Debbie. That was truly funny, sir. To look back what I said 13 minutes ago. Leave the money earning to chance. David, he's still so young. Did I say that? Oh, I probably used the word chance, and you mean that's right. I got it. I was still using the concept chance and then my son chance. Exactly. He says that. He's like, Daddy, don't worry. When you grow up, when I grow up, you won't have to work because I'll earn money. This is chance. He doesn't know that I have to work anyway because I tell him I have to work so I can go play it. But don't tell him that. Ah, I love it when David gets excited. Glad I read that one. So yeah, you could be grateful and curious, not grateful or that. Yeah, you're right. That's awesome. Very cool distinction. I would say you're either grateful or curious, but either way, like you can be, if you don't if you don't hit the objective, yeah, if you don't, oh, then I'm curious, but then you can be grateful that oh, I know what it is. I'm not really grateful if I don't figure something out yet. And if I don't get like the objective, then I wouldn't say that I'm grateful. That would be at some point I'd be blowing smoke up my own ass to hear someone. But I'm not like upset. I'm just curious. Curious is fun too, right? Like you're pursuing a goal in a way that you're going after it, like being in flow. It's cool. I'm just not actually grateful. But when I get something I want, hit an objective, including just appreciating, there's some things that I live within having what I want. If you have a car you want or a house you want, significant other you want, the health you want, whatever, you can be grateful for that constantly. You just keep on seeing the difference between having it and not. It'll fade from view if you try to look, if you just look at it, or naturally it'll fade from view. Do you guys know that if they hold eyeballs artificially still, or if they somehow manage to tie an image so it moves exactly alongside, your eyes do this thing called saccades, right? A lot of you might know this, but in case you don't, your eyes naturally, when you think you're holding them still, they're actually moving with micro movements called saccades, SACADES. And when they've done experiments where they artificially either hold them still by numbing the muscles, or they might do something, they might not, I can't remember, where they hold the image still relative to the eyeball, I can't remember. Then it literally fades from view. Right. And that's when people get used to things, but you never need to stop being grateful for things that you have. All you have to do is keep them in view, so to speak, by looking at the difference between having it and not having it, just in your head. And then you feel great. I do that all the time. I'm constantly psyched about things that I have instead of just forgetting. I wouldn't have to have all the cool things I have. And plus other people have all kinds of better things. And so sorry, maybe not. I don't mean to include my wife. I'm not saying someone's better. But anyway, you get it. So yeah, so grateful or curious, sometimes grateful and curious. Oh, when I get a result, sometimes I get a result, but I still don't know exactly how I did it. And then I'll be curious and grateful at the same time. But a lot of people, because they're doing stuff to reinforce their self-image without realizing it. And I really don't mean that critically. I mean it like a revelation. I don't mean that condescendingly or superior wise or anything. It's doing this all the time and it's really inefficient. So I don't want you to feel like it's condescending because it'll incentivize you to like believe that you're not doing it. And you more want to see how you do it and what's good about it and what's bad about it. And again, we'll delve into that probably even right away, like next time. But so what people will do is they'll get a result they want and what'll that do? They'll decide it's them. They're so awesome. And that'll be the reason why they got the result is they're apparent awesome in their head. Right. And people do this nonstop. And so they won't be curious. As a matter of fact, my proof of this, in addition to the fact that you probably see it already, but people think it's bragging or they'll even wonder why you're talking about something. If you talk about a success that you yourself had, then people will assume that you're just doing it to feel good, to reinforce your self-image or just brag or pat yourself on the back. But actually, if you have a success, you should think about it. If you're not exactly sure how you did it, instead of just assuming that it's, oh, because people think that the only conclusion to make when you accomplish something well is that you did it because you're inherently great, right? And so they think the only thing you can mean if you're trying to figure out how you did it is how and why you're just so awesome already, right? But instead, if you're trying to figure out how you actually did it, besides the fact that you're allegedly so awesome, right? Like my current resources, mind, body, and so forth has good stuff and bad stuff, right? Resources and issues and so forth and limitations. Even if it doesn't have, even separately from having contradictions, there's just limitations and stuff I don't know, stuff I haven't thought of, right? So the idea of proving that it's all so terrific. And again, often we'll get results and we don't know exactly all the ingredients. And so you want to be able to delve into it. But people have this kind of background view that causes people to feel wrong about doing it. And plus people will react badly to doing it in a lot of cases. Wowza, connecting, understanding, being related to finding a sticking point. Yeah, that's a big one. I'm talking about there. That replay that and so forth. I'll get to replay it by tomorrow. Take a look at this real quick. If I recall from the LOI series 2014, you had said something I recall or translate as, someone may ask, are you saying I should put everything on hold until I'm certain about what my next action should be? Yes. Oh, maybe I meant something like fundamentally right by that and maybe not, but you can just ignore that relative to what I said. I explained it pretty well here, so you'll probably just confuse yourself. It's a reasonable thing to kind of see it in comparing with this, but and a way to interpret this so it's correct, and then we could suppose that that's what I meant. See, you can be certain, you think of it in terms of a foothold. You don't need to know the exact tactic. If you interpret what I mean, what I was saying there in terms of you need to know the right tactics to use, like the specific instructions or recipe for that one thing that you're doing, that one task, then of course, no, you need to try stuff and poke around. If I were to never do one of these webinars until I knew the exact right words, ideal words to say, the exact right slides to have, then of course that doesn't make sense. But one of the ways to start knowing things is to just know some very simple general things. Okay, I'm acting as if I need some money. So let's stipulate I need some money. So I'm certain that I at least need some money. I'm certain that I need to get to thinking about how I know things, epistemology, to a decent degree. I need to put some focus into that. I want to get to where survival or like irrelevant things or things my mind feels are great, but they were just related to survival when I was a child, like socializing, right? I'm not saying socializing is a waste all over the place, but it could be the benefit of it is overblown. And because it was important for survival, either when you're young or just inherently, humans are wired up to be social because it helps us survive as individuals and as a species. Uh, Being social is nice, but it can of course be done in a way that it just holds you back in life, or that you're just constantly hanging out with people talking about nothing of consequence instead of spending some time on your own working on important ideas. Then that's not ideal. Anyway, that just gives a quick indication. I'm trying to wrap things down a little bit now. So Yeah, I don't use a lot of controversial words just to make it easier for people, and in case some kids listen to this and stuff. Hey, that's all right. Mhm. Thank you, David. Great start to the new series. Excellent. Yeah, I think this will shape up to be a super one. Looking forward to being live for it all. That. Thank you. I like when people are live. I appreciate that. We had a lot of people live today. You're welcome, Rick. I always think of you. I even rewrote I need to look it back up at the question that you posed earlier with the goal, the overall kind of goal thing. And I think now I'm even explaining even way better how the correct way to look at goals is not as simple as the idea that is often out there that you so nicely summarized with the having something larger than yourself and you make your step-by-step plan and so forth and such. Again, that tends to assume you're already on the right island. Always incredible information that challenges my normal way of thinking. Awesome. I am alleged to be awesome because I could rank webs. That is pretty awesome. Thanks. Getting ready to hit the hay. Yeah, super. This will be good to dream of. You're welcome, Justin. That's great. I appreciate you very much. And thanks for coming on live. And Megan, thanks for everything you do, Megan, and all the cool posters and sayings you've been posting. Acknowledging reality and letting go of self-image or what anyone will think. I'm reminded so many more possible things to look at. Yeah. Yeah. I think this can help you. I think what I talked about with you as a whole, not just you, Megan, but what I talked about with conversion, I think can shake a number of things loose for people. A lot of stuff. A little bit too brain locked to read that whole thing, but it's right here for posterity, and I'll get to it. It's possible that, oh yeah, cool, my driving out of San Francisco thing. It's possible that driving to San Francisco is not progress, even if you end up making money. Oh no, people can make money and end up in more debt than they started with. People can destroy themselves making money if they don't have an overall. As a matter of fact, people normally do. The first time they make money, they tend to blow a gasket. Myself included, I screwed things up when I first made money a while ago, and luckily it wasn't too much, so my hole wasn't, right? I didn't exactly get myself in a hole, actually, no debt. But you just screwed up in a number of ways. First time. You're very welcome, Suzanne. Thanks for being on live. Thank you, Julie. Welcome. You're welcome, Paul. Welcome, Brian and Jez. I'm looking for ways not to get stuck in constant goal setting. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, we'll delve into all that. The whole idea of understanding this whole paradigm of letting goals reveal themselves is super, totally effective. It's just the way to go. You're welcome, David. And I'm looking forward to them too. Okay, guys. You're welcome, Debbie and Shanice. I'll end the webinar now, and I will see you all next week. Should be the same time next week. You're welcome, Maria. You're welcome, Dave.